Welcome to Fanfic Nation, where stories rise beyond limits, heroes defy destiny, and what if becomes legend. From epic battles to untold adventures, this is the nation of fan-made worlds. Subscribe and step into stories beyond canon. This novel is written by JD 787.
I want to mine dragonglass here. What do I need to prepare? Aegor held the torch close to the cave wall, illuminating the gleaming black volcanic rock. So this is what a dragonglass mine looks like. What's the use of this for a night's watchman? The old mine owner muttered as he handed the torch to his youngest son. Pulling a small hammer from his waist pouch, he tapped on the cave wall, studying it closely. After a few moments, he straightened up and shook his head. The mine is already here. It's above sea level with a stable structure, and natural ventilation means no worries about collapse, water seepage, or toxic gases. The ore itself is pure dragonglass, requiring no refining. Mining this is almost effortless. Just get some strong men and there's no need to worry about them sneaking nuggets like they would in a gold mine. The only thing you need to watch out for is falling rocks. Build some scaffolding and lay planks to keep workers safe during the mining. Aegor nodded, his expression thoughtful. He wasn't an expert in mining, but he knew when to defer to those with experience. With a respectful tone, he asked, "Can you make a clear list of what we need? When can we start mining and how much will this cost? We'll need to make a list of tools and materials first. That can't be done here. As for when we can start mining, the conditions are excellent. If you have the money and tools ready, work could begin tonight." The old miner hesitated before continuing. "As for costs, it depends on how urgently you need the dragonglass, how much you want, and the quality of the ore you're looking for." "What do you mean by ore quality?" "For example, if you want to carve something grand like the dragon heads at the castle gates, you'd need large, flawless stones which are difficult to mine. But if you're just making beads or bracelets, the workers can smash smaller pieces directly from the walls, which is much cheaper and easier." That made sense. Aegor stroked his chin, considering the options. Dragonglass, after all, was little more than volcanic glass. Forging massive weapons like swords was impractical. The children of the forest had used dragonglass daggers and arrowheads to fight the White Walkers thousands of years ago, and those designs had already been proven effective. With that in mind, mining smaller, easily workable pieces for arrows and daggers made the most sense. Against intelligent foes like the White Walkers, long-range attacks seemed far more viable than repeated close combat. "The ore doesn't need to be large," Aegor said. "Focus on pieces that are practical for crafting weapons. We'll work with what's naturally available." "Understood," the old miner nodded. "I'll prepare a list of tools and supplies. You can confirm the quantities after reviewing it. Once that's done, I can handle the procurement. It'll cost less than if you try to source it yourself. Also, you'll need someone to manage the site. This person will oversee the workers, prevent slacking, and ensure tools aren't stolen and sold off. My youngest son grew up around the mines near Casterly Rock. While he's not as experienced as me, he knows a lot more than someone new to the job." Aegor smiled. Before being transported to this world, he had never been in a leadership position. But he understood a key principle. Benefits should be shared among many, but planning must involve only a select few. In other words, major decisions should be made by a small, trusted group, while the execution should ensure everyone involved feels rewarded. Attempting to hoard all benefits or micromanage would only lead to failure. "If the water is too clear, there are no fish," Aegor mused inwardly. Stannis Baratheon failed to grasp this, which explained why he was disliked by most of Westeros' nobility. While Aegor admired Stannis' fairness, he had no desire to emulate his isolation. Important matters would be discussed with Tyrion. For mining, the old mine owner clearly wanted to secure a future for his son and perhaps earn a little extra from purchasing tools. Aegor had no objections. "Fine," Aegor said with a nod. "Your son will be the manager of the obsidian mine. He'll oversee all mining operations. His salary will be 100 silver stags a month, with the possibility of bonuses if he performs well. But there's one condition: all expenses, whether for tools, hearing workers, or travel, must be clearly accounted for. I'll need to report everything to my superiors. The Night's Watch has limited funds, so there's no room for excessive spending." "Thank you, sir," the old miner replied, clearly pleased. He clapped his son on the shoulder, and the younger man quickly expressed his gratitude. "Call me Aegor, there's no need for formalities." Aegor shook his head. "We need to get started quickly. The initial budget is capped at 100 gold dragons. Within a month, I want the first shipment of obsidian ready to be sent to Eastwatch. Aim to fill the small boat we took to Dragonstone." "That's not much," the old miner remarked. "Recruiting a dozen workers from the village should suffice." "Good. Finalize the details with your son. Tyrion introduced me to you, so I trust your expertise." "Thank you, Aegor," the old miner said again, his tone grateful. "All right, let's head back to the village before it gets dark. I promised you all a good meal." Aegor soon faced an awkward problem. Fulfilling his promise of a hearty meal for his companions turned out to be harder than expected. It wasn't because the villagers were price-gouging visitors. Stannis' strict nature would never allow such behavior on his lands. The issue was simpler: the village didn't have anything to sell. When Aegor asked for pork, beef, or mutton, they had none. Chicken, duck, or goose, also none. The only thing available was fish. Aegor glanced at the young guide, realizing the man was likely sick of fish after a lifetime on Dragonstone. "Is it the same at the castle?" Aegor asked, puzzled. What does the cook serve Stannies when he wants something other than fish? Supplies come by ship every 10 days or so, the guide explained with a helpless shrug. Whatever arrives determines what the castle has until the next delivery. Aegor nodded, deep in thought. If we're shipping out obsidian every month, we'll arrange for those ships to bring meat, poultry, and other supplies on their return trips, add it to the food budget. And deliver half of it to Lord Stannies. It's only fair, considering he hasn't taxed us for mining on his land. The Night's Watch shouldn't take such kindness for granted. Before being transported to this world, Aegor hadn't dealt with such mundane logistics, but he understood the importance of doing things properly, leaving no room for complaints. The food costs would be negligible, especially if Tyrion agreed to his fundraising plans. And since the miners' food expenses were technically the Night's Watch's responsibility, it was a win-win situation. In the end, Aegor managed to keep his promise. At 3 times the usual price, he convinced a villager to butcher an egg-laying hen for their meal. With several fish dishes as sides, the guide finally got to enjoy something different. Watching the young man devour his chicken leg with enthusiasm, Aegor realized it had probably been months since the man had tasted chicken. After the meal, the group continued discussing mining plans over beer. The old miner, tipsy and in high spirits, became the center of attention, regaling them with tales of his youth managing Lannister mines. His stories, filled with both humor and intrigue, captivated the table. At one point, he began recounting how Tywin had stripped his father's mistress naked and paraded her through Lannisport after taking control of Casterly Rock. Though Aegor found the story vulgar, even he couldn't help but listen with interest. But before the old miner could describe the woman's white body in detail, the door suddenly swung open. A woman entered the room, her commanding presence silencing the table. "This is the first time a Night's Watchman has come to Dragonstone, and you didn't think to inform me." Before Aegor could respond, the guide rose hastily, his face pale. "Lady Melisandre, why are you here?" Aegor had to admit that Melisandre was an alluring woman. With red hair, red eyes, and a strikingly beautiful face, she wore a bright red robe that clearly could not have been dyed with the ordinary methods of this era. She was so dazzling that even the current queen, renowned as the most beautiful woman in the 7 Kingdoms, who was 10 years younger than her, could only be considered her equal in beauty. If he didn't know her identity, he would have been delighted to meet such a stunning woman and might even have considered her as one of his potential conquests. But at this stage, Aegor truly couldn't fathom how this priestess, whose age was a mystery, whose skills were questionable, and who relied on fire tricks and illusions to pass off as something otherworldly, could possibly help his plans. She was the very woman who had deceived Stannis Baratheon, causing him to lose his family and nearly bringing the entire Baratheon house to ruin through internal strife. Deep down, as a world traveler, Aegor instinctively felt a bit of fear toward her, not only because she had a penchant for burning people alive when she disagreed with them, but also because she wielded something called magic, which did not exist in the modern world he came from. Humans always fear what they don't understand. This is a built-in self-preservation mechanism at the genetic level, and Aegor didn't feel ashamed of it. True bravery is not the absence of fear but the ability to overcome it. While he did harbor a mix of awe and unease toward Melisandre, he wasn't yet prepared to deal with this key figure in the plot. But since she had come to him of her own accord, he had no choice but to confront her head-on. He suppressed the tension in his heart, and his rational mind quickly kicked into gear. The woman in front of him was terrifying, yes, but she wasn't like the Mad King, who was unpredictable and bloodthirsty. If the enemy of my enemy is my friend, then Melisandre, who is aware of the White Walkers and who wholeheartedly served the Lord of Light, should in theory be an ally of the Night's Watch, someone on the same side. Even though Aegor intended to leave the Night's Watch eventually, she didn't know that yet. Once he worked through that line of reasoning, Aegor felt his nerves settle. Rising from his seat, he looked at the red-robed woman with a calm demeanor, though he couldn't help but wonder whether her breathtaking beauty was natural or an illusion created through magic. Melisandre must have come to him to gather intelligence about the state of affairs at the Wall and beyond, likely to gauge the White Walkers' threat to humanity and to formulate a response. Should he tell her the truth, or exaggerate the danger to see if he could extract some kind of assistance from her? No, things must be handled step by step. First, let's figure out how to greet her. Should he feign ignorance? If he hadn't known the plot beforehand, he wouldn't recognize Melisandre at this moment. It was better to play it safe. He decided to act as if he didn't know her and addressed her simply. "Good evening, ma'am. Good evening." Melisandre's voice carried a soft, almost hypnotic quality as she gave him a warm, alluring smile. "The representatives of the Kingdom's Shield have come to Dragonstone as guests. We ought to receive you with proper hospitality. Alas, the island is poor in resources, so I apologize if our welcome has been lacking." "You're too kind," Aegor replied calmly. "I'm here on official business, not for leisure." Melisandre smiled and nodded, moving slowly toward the table where Aegor and his companions sat. The summer heat was oppressive, and most of the men had rolled up their sleeves, exposing their forearms. As Melisandre drew closer, the exposed skin on Aegor's arms began to feel an undeniable warmth radiating from her, a sensation that was far from natural. It was as if the air itself around her carried a palpable heat. Aegor's heart skipped a beat. What was this? Unless Melisandre was walking around with a fever of 50 or 60 degrees, there was no way she could generate such an intense aura of heat. Was this some sort of trick? Or was the god she believed in truly shielding her with this blazing warmth? Suppressing his suspicions, Aegor kept his composure, waiting for her next question or test. He braced himself both mentally and physically for any unexpected developments, yet what happened next caught everyone in the room completely off guard. Huh! Melisandre suddenly froze, her expression shifting into one of shock. Under the watchful gazes of those in the room, some filled with greed, others with reverence, she abruptly stepped back as though she had been burned by an invisible flame. Her piercing red eyes fixed on Aegor with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Guards," she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. "Seize this heretic." Two fully armed Dragonstone guards rushed into the room, their sharp spears pointed directly at the stunned Night's Watchman. What was going on? This was the second time Aegor had been captured since his arrival in this world. The first time he had been unarmed and faced a group of peasants wielding pitchforks and axes. Knowing he was in the wrong and unable to resist, he had obediently surrendered. That capture had resulted in him being sent to the wall to become a member of the Night's Watch. But this time, what had he done? There was no time to think. Aegor's body reacted instinctively, honed by a year of service as a ranger. His hand went to his waist, but he found no sword hilt there. He suddenly remembered that the steel sword issued by the Night's Watch had been turned into the armory back at Castle Black when he departed. Besides, once he reached King's Landing, there had been no reason to carry a weapon. "Don't move," one of the guards barked, tightening his grip on his spear, his expression fierce. Aegor quickly sized up the situation. This was Dragonstone, and the men in front of him were soldiers personally trained by Stannis Baratheon. Stannis was a seasoned warrior and commander, and his soldiers would undoubtedly have better combat skills than Aegor. A one-on-one fight might be manageable, but against two armed guards and with Melisandre, a mysterious witch, standing nearby, he knew resistance was futile even if he had been armed. The room seemed to freeze in time. The old miner and his son, terrified, stood frozen in place. The homeowner, who had been about to offer a chair to the Red Priestess, now stood motionless in the middle of the room, gripping the chair like a lifeline. The young man assigned to guide Aegor looked utterly lost. As a native of Dragonstone, his loyalty was naturally to Stannis, the Lord of Dragonstone, but just moments ago he had been sharing a meal with Aegor. If the Night's Watchman resisted, which side should he take? "I surrender," Aegor said after a brief pause, his tone steady. "But please let me settle the bill first." He reached for his coin pouch, untied it, and tossed it to the old miner. "Go back to the ship and tell the captain I'll be detained at the castle. Ask him to wait for me until noon tomorrow." When Aegor had tried to visit Dragonstone Castle earlier that morning, he had been turned away at the gate. Now he was being escorted inside by armed guards. His surrender seemed to ease the tension in the room. Melisandre visibly relaxed and followed the guards as they marched Aegor to the castle. Once inside, they tied him tightly to a pillar in one of the chambers. Standing a few meters away, Melisandre's voice was calm but firm. "Who sent you?" Aegor met her gaze, his expression resolute, but his thoughts were racing. He had manipulated the Stark family, framed the current crown prince, and conned Tyrion Lannister into supporting his schemes. From one perspective, he had done enough to warrant execution 10 times over. But none of his actions had harmed or even involved Stannis Baratheon, let alone offended the Lord of Light. And as for the charge of heresy, wasn't Westeros full of heretics in the eyes of the Red God? Stannis wasn't king yet. Who gave Melisandre the authority to persecute unbelievers? Jeor Mormont, the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Aegor finally said. Of course, he wasn't about to admit that Tyrion had funded his mission. But even if he told the truth, it shouldn't offend Melisandre or her faith. Could she somehow know about his plans to leave the wall? Really? And why were you sent here? Aegor explained his mission honestly, outlining the 4 tasks he had been given. Suppressing his growing frustration, he added, "Lady Melisandre, there must be some misunderstanding. This is the first time I've ever seen you." "This is indeed our first meeting," Melisandre said, her voice laced with suspicion. "But I sense an ancient and powerful aura emanating from you, one that belongs to a foreign god. Who are you?" Aegor's heart skipped a beat. Ancient foreign god, he swore he had no idea what she was talking about. Could it be the lingering traces of ice magic from his encounters with the White Walkers? Or was it because he was not originally from this world that the priestess had detected something unusual about him? Keeping his composure, he replied firmly, "Ma'am, I truly don't understand what you're talking about." "Perhaps you don't," Melisandre said, smiling faintly, "but I have my ways of uncovering the truth." She gestured to one of the guards. "Bring a brazier." A brazier? Was she planning to torture him? Aegor's mind raced. He had always prided himself on his ability to plan ahead. He had rehearsed excuses and escape plans for situations where his lies might be exposed, whether by the Starks, Robert Baratheon, or even Cersei Lannister. But this situation had caught him completely off guard. He had simply come to Dragonstone to survey an obsidian mine. What could he possibly confess to Melisandre? Would he be forced to reveal that he was a world traveler if she pressed him too hard? And even if he did, would she believe him? The brazier was brought in and placed a meter in front of Aegor. To his surprise, there was no glowing hot iron inside. Instead, Melisandre produced a knife and handed it to the guard. Take some of his blood, she ordered. Just a few drops, I want him alive. The Dragonstone guard who had been ordered to act walked toward Aegor holding a knife shorter than his palm. Shrugging apologetically, the young man glanced at him. Bound tightly with his torso and limbs secured, Aegor could only feebly struggle against the ropes, shaking his body as he watched the guard approach. His thoughts raced, but no clear answers came. What was happening? Could it be that his blood, as someone from another world, carried some unique power that the Lord of Light, our Lord, required? If that were the case, would he eventually be thrown into the fire and sacrificed at some critical moment? He had knowledge far beyond anyone else in this world. He had a massive plan to slowly establish a foothold, build his own connections and influence, and eventually use resources and strategy to intervene in the Game of Thrones. He had plans to change pivotal events in the future and potentially alter the fate of the entire world. He had survived the White Walkers, left the Wall far behind, and was just beginning to embark on a new life. Was everything going to end prematurely on this desolate island at the mouth of Blackwater Bay? Aegor's wide eyes were fixed on the knife in the guard's hand. A few drops of blood weren't enough to scare him into losing his composure or begging for mercy, but the real issue was what might come after. Like Tyrion, he fancied himself a clever man, but cleverness was of little use against an opponent whose intentions were completely unknown. He had no idea why Melisandre had suddenly turned hostile, and he had no leverage to counter it. Just my arm, be gentle, please, Aegor said, eyeing the guard's trembling hand as it gripped the knife. He was determined to retain the last shred of dignity in this humiliating situation by choosing where the wound would be made. All right, the man holding the knife was a young guard, no older than 20. He had been a child during the last Great War and had joined Stannis' forces only a year ago. This was the first time he had ever used a weapon to deliberately draw blood from someone. Aegor's calm but sarcastic remark only made him more nervous, and the guard applied too little force, resulting in a shallow cut. It took several seconds for the blood to start seeping out. Hurriedly, the guard used the back of the knife to scrape up a few drops of blood and carried it over to the priestess. Melisandre took out a handkerchief, wiped the blood off the blade, and let the fabric absorb the droplets. Then she threw the blood-stained cloth into the brazier and turned her gaze intently toward the flames. Aegor's eyes also shifted to the fire, but he saw nothing unusual. His blood didn't have any kind of power. The flames engulfed the handkerchief, and aside from the brief addition of a new flicker, neither the color nor the temperature of the fire changed in any significant way. However, Melisandre's expression grew solemn. Her wide, unblinking eyes stared at the brazier as though it held the answer to some ultimate question, though whatever it was seemed frustratingly out of reach. She leaned closer, gripping the brazier's stand, moving her face nearer and nearer to the flames. Aegor was startled to notice that the flames actually licked at her hair, yet not a single strand curled or burned. The priestess of the Lord of Light truly had some extraordinary abilities. She appeared immune to fire itself. About a minute later, Melisandre finally released the brazier stand and stepped back. Her gaze returned to Aegor, her red eyes gleaming with interest. As she opened her mouth to speak, the door suddenly burst open with a loud bang and a man entered the room. You arrested the Night's Watchman. Against the light of the brazier, Aegor couldn't make out the figure's face, but the commanding tone of the voice and his own instincts told him who it was. Lord Stannis. I'm here under the orders of Jeor Mormont to oversee the mining of dragonglass. You should be aware of this. I swear I've done nothing wrong on your island. If I've offended you or Lady Melisandre unintentionally, I apologize. But please untie me. I'm willing to face her directly to clear up this misunderstanding. What do you mean by this? Stannis ignored Aegor's outburst and turned his cold gaze toward Melisandre. The Night's Watch came here to mine dragonglass. Lord Stark wrote to inform me of this, and I granted my permission. Who do you think you are, ordering the arrest of someone who entered my land with my approval? Do you remember the ancient alien gods I told you about? Melisandre asked, nodding respectfully toward Stannis. A faint smile played on her lips. I sensed a powerful aura of a foreign god emanating from this Night's Watchman. I wanted to understand why that, or perhaps those, gods sent him here. I don't care what you want to understand, Melisandre. Stannis' voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. You have your uses, which is why I tolerate your presence on Dragonstone. But if you continue to act without my approval and indulge in nonsense, I'll have no choice but to send you away. Now release the Night's Watchman and apologize to him, or leave Dragonstone immediately. Relief swept through Aegor's body like a wave. He had narrowly avoided disaster. For several seconds, his mind went blank before he silently clenched his fists behind his back. Knowing the plot and holding advanced knowledge suddenly felt meaningless. In this world, his fate could be decided with a single word from these powerful figures. He realized with startling clarity how urgently he needed to turn his advantages into tangible influence and real power. As you wish, my lord, Melisandre said after a moment, her tone softening as she lowered her gaze. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by quiet obedience. Let him go. The young guard holding the knife hesitated, clearly confused. But since both Stannis and Melisandre had spoken, he quickly moved to untie Aegor. Without another word, Stannis snorted and turned to leave the room. Perhaps it was because the young guard had been intimidated by Lord Stannis moments ago, or maybe he was simply clumsy by nature, but it took him several seconds to figure out how to untie the knot. Impatient, Melisandre finally shook her head. Step aside, I'll do it. Ever since she had ordered Aegor's capture, the Red Priestess had kept a cautious distance of 2 meters, standing in a defensive posture. Now confident that he posed no immediate threat, she approached the bound Night's Watchman. The hot air radiating from her seemed to intensify as she ran her hand lightly along his arm, brushing against the ropes that restrained him. Aegor flinched slightly. Her touch came with a faint, burning sensation, and almost immediately the ropes binding him began to snap one by one with loud pops. Freed, he stepped forward to steady himself, rolling his shoulders and stretching his arms. Touching the spots on his skin where he had felt the heat, he found no burns or injuries, only a lingering warmth. Looking down at the broken ropes on the ground, he noticed the severed ends were charred black, faint wisps of smoke curling into the air. The ropes had been burned, yet his skin remained unscathed. The sheer impossibility of what had just happened left Aegor at a loss for words. No explanation, no knowledge he possessed could account for it. Melisandre stood within arm's reach now, close enough that Aegor could have wrapped his hands around her slender neck and choked the life out of her. And yet, as much as he loathed her at this moment, he had to admit that he couldn't bring himself to act. The woman standing before him, seemingly delicate and fragile, exuded an intangible power that made his instincts scream in warning. "I apologize, my friend in black," Melisandre said, her tone softened. But the expression on her face betrayed no genuine remorse. Her words were delivered with the detached, self-assured air of someone who considered herself superior. "This is the first time I've encountered such a potent aura of a foreign god other than my Lord of Light, and I was caught off guard. I overreacted and in doing so caused you to suffer. Please forgive me." Aegor had no intention of forgiving her, nor did he plan to leave quietly, tail tucked between his legs. He had always considered himself a calm and good-natured person, but when truly provoked, his anger was far from trivial. What bothered him more than the humiliation was the feeling of being at the mercy of an enemy whose motives and intentions he couldn't understand. Tonight he intended to get to the bottom of this. If Melisandre couldn't provide a reasonable explanation for her actions, he might need to add a fight to the death category to his mental blacklist. When he returned to King's Landing to begin preparations for his next steps, acquiring supplies, recruiting soldiers, and raising funds, his first order of business might just involve finding a way to eliminate this woman. He already had an idea. The faceless man Jaqen H'ghar was currently imprisoned in King's Landing, likely destined to be recruited by Yoren into the Night's Watch. As a devout follower of the many-faced god, Jaqen would surely resist being taken to the wall to swear an oath of service. If Aegor could find a way to release him, he doubted it would be difficult to secure Jaqen's help in dealing with Melisandre. Aegor couldn't help but feel a curious fascination at the thought. What would happen if a devotee of the many-faced god, someone who claimed to be able to kill anyone, clashed with the mysterious priestess of the Red God? "It's easy enough for me to tell Lord Stannis that I forgive you, my lady," Aegor said, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "But I was in the middle of enjoying a good meal when I was dragged off, tied to a pillar and stabbed. If I don't understand why any of that happened, I doubt anyone would expect me to let it go so easily." His voice was calm but firm as he met her gaze. "I need an explanation, Lady Melisandre." Perhaps it was the trace of murderous intent in Aegor's eyes, or perhaps it was guilt gnawing at her conscience, but the casual expression on Melisandre's face faded. She stared at him for a moment in silence before the corners of her lips curved into a faint smile. "All right." The Night's Watch had always been the backbone of the fight against the enemies of the Lord of Light. Aegor was the first man in black she had encountered since coming to Westeros. Despite her disdain for mortals, Melisandre decided it was unwise to risk offending a potential ally so quickly. The red-robed woman turned and gestured toward 2 chairs in the corner of the room, inviting Aegor to sit. "Ask me anything. As long as my lord does not forbid me from answering, I'll tell you everything I know." Unceremoniously, Aegor strode to a chair and sat down. "You said I carry the aura of an alien god. What does that mean?" "To be precise," Melisandre replied, "you have 2 auras. One is dark and evil but very faint, the other is far stronger though it carries no malice. Either way, you're fortunate to be alive." "Why do I have these 2 auras?" Aegor pressed, his skepticism clear. Materialist by nature, he struggled to believe in talk of gods and divine powers. Yet in this world where the woman in front of him had just demonstrated abilities beyond his comprehension, he knew better than to dismiss her words outright. "I'm just an ordinary soldier of the Night's Watch." "No, you are not." Melisandre's red eyes glimmered. "I saw you in the flames fighting a servant of the Great Other, the God of Cold. You were brave, but bravery alone does not explain your survival. Few mortals can slay such creatures, yet you killed a White Walker. The moment you did, you ceased to be ordinary. That act marked you, drawing the attention of the God of Cold." Melisandre waved her hand, dismissing the guards and instructing them to close the door behind them. "The evil aura clinging to you is a remnant of that battle. In the future, should you enter the God of Cold's perception, you will be noticed far more quickly than your comrades." Aegor's heart sank. It wasn't just her ability to glean his past from a few drops of blood that unsettled him, but the implications of her words. He had been marked by this so-called God of Cold. But what was the God of Cold? Was it just another name for the Night King? And how had Melisandre known about his encounter with the White Walker? Did she truly see it in the flames, or had Stannis learned of it through Jeor Mormont or Eddard Stark's letters and told her? What about the other, stronger aura? Aegor asked, masking his unease. Yes, I killed a White Walker. It's the toughest enemy I've ever faced, and I only won because it underestimated me. If even that fight left me with a faint trace of evil, then what kind of fight would leave behind the powerful aura you sensed? That's the mystery, Melisandre admitted, her gaze narrowing. The existence that left the other aura is far weaker than the god of cold, yet the mark it left on you is exceptionally vivid. Such a thing should only happen if you had direct contact with it, if you confronted it face to face. But for a mortal to survive such an encounter is impossible. Stranger still, in the flames, I saw a boy falling from a great height. If you want me to explain further, you'll need to tell me what happened. You saw it all, didn't you? Aegor retorted. Why do you need me to explain? Fire divination isn't as all-seeing as you might imagine, Melisandre replied. Once Aegor sat down, she took the seat across from him. What I saw wasn't a complete picture. Your blood carried traces of the two forces I spoke of, and they revealed fragmented scenes. The evil aura was faint, so it only showed me flashes of your battle with the servant of the god of cold, the White Walker. I saw you nearly perish as you plunged the dragonglass dagger into its chest, that was all. The stronger aura, however, allowed me to see more. I saw you running on a rooftop speaking with a boy, and then he fell. I couldn't hear what you said to him, nor could I decipher what relationship it had to a god. That's why I need your account. What were you doing that day? I was trying to stop it, Aegor replied, frowning. Then, as if struck by lightning, a single thought surged to the forefront of his mind, Greenseer. The memory of that moment filled Aegor with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. He had failed to stop Bran from falling, and his interference had been clumsy and ill-planned. But now, after hearing Melisandre's words, he began to wonder if his failure had less to do with his own actions and more to do with forces beyond his control. Could it be that the outcome had been inevitable, that his actions were meaningless against a powerful entity pulling the strings? It was like the stock market. No matter how clever or precise a retail trader's moves were, they couldn't outplay the big players. And even those market makers, no matter how wealthy, wouldn't dare to challenge the system itself. The two sides operated on entirely different levels, and there was no doubt as to who would prevail. Bran's fall wasn't an accident. It had been orchestrated, perhaps by the Greenseer himself. The more Aegor thought about it, the more everything clicked into place. The Greenseer's influence might explain why Bran was so determined to climb the tower that day, why the Lannister twins seemed compelled to enter the first keep, and why events unfolded exactly as they did. Melisandre watched him closely, noting his hesitation and the way his expression shifted between contemplation and doubt. Interpreting his silence as evasion, her face darkened slightly. Friend of the Night's Watch, I've been rude. I don't believe I've asked your name yet. You can call me Aegor, he said flatly. Well, Aegor, Melisandre said softly, her tone taking on a more persuasive edge, if you know anything, it would be wise to tell me. The witch regarded the Night's Watch as hardened warriors standing guard against unimaginable horrors in the frozen north. In her eyes, they were the toughest of men, and Aegor in particular intrigued her. Deciding to adopt a gentler approach, she continued, the two gods who left their marks on you are far beyond the power of mortals in the south. Either one could end your life with a single flick of their finger. Only the Lord of Light can protect you now. Aegor hesitated. He didn't know whether the gods of this world were truly omnipotent, transcendent beings as described in legend, or simply more powerful entities that had mastered the use of magic. But regardless of which they were, one thing was clear: Arlor, the Lord of Light, was a real and formidable force in this world. If he had to pledge himself to a deity, Arlor would certainly be a strong candidate. But Aegor faced a problem. He was not an ordinary man. He carried too many secrets. As the saying goes, an innocent man becomes guilty by holding a treasure. If he threw himself into the arms of a god recklessly, it might work out well if they could cooperate openly. But what if this god became greedy for the knowledge in his mind, or curious about the possibilities of worlds beyond this one? What if it decided to drain him of everything he knew and then discard or even destroy him? Aegor would have no means of resistance. He couldn't even stand up to a single priest of Arlor, let alone bargain with a divine being. Before he had the power to sit at the same table as these players, entrusting his life to someone or something he didn't understand would not be a wise move. Moreover, he had to consider the backstory he had crafted for himself. An outsider from beyond the Sunset Sea who had managed to quickly integrate into Westerosi society was already a rarity. How could he reveal secrets that even the locals didn't know without exposing himself further? In a cold, ruthless world filled with unfathomable supernatural powers, caution was always the best policy. With that in mind, Aegor composed himself, adopting a confused expression. After organizing his thoughts, he began to speak. That happened during King Robert's northern tour. I went south with Chief Ranger Benjen Stark to report the movements of the wildlings and White Walkers beyond the wall to the Warden of the North. One day, while I was training alone in a quiet corner of Winterfell, I noticed Lord Stark's second son climbing the castle walls. I was worried he might fall, so I tried to dissuade him. But the boy wouldn't listen. In the end, he was startled by someone who suddenly poked their head out of the first keep and lost his footing. But no matter how you look at it, it was just an accident. If I offended any god in the process, then that god must have wanted Bran to fall to die or to become disabled. Lying is an art, and Aegor had learned a valuable trick: deceive yourself before deceiving others. The best lies are rooted in truth. If you create an identity within a story, everything you do and say must strictly align with that identity. It's like writing a novel. No matter how strange or fantastical the setting, as long as it's consistent within its own rules, it will appear logical. If a liar can immerse themselves deeply enough to believe their own words, the deception becomes nearly unbreakable. Aegor had placed himself in the role of an adventurer from beyond the Sunset Sea, and in this role he told the Red Priestess the complete, unvarnished truth, as much as fit within the parameters of the identity he had constructed. How could anyone detect a lie when there wasn't one? Even so, while he carefully avoided revealing the secret of his time travel, he worked to subtly lead Melisandre's thoughts. As long as her reasoning followed his guesses without veering into suspicion, he would be able to navigate this conversation without issue. Melisandre was no demon. She was simply a woman who had mastered magic or found a way to communicate with the so-called Red God. Faced with Aegor's truthful answers, even if she wasn't fully satisfied, there wasn't much she could question further. Instead, Aegor's carefully placed remarks triggered her own thoughts, and she soon squinted deep in contemplation. "I understand now," she said after a pause. Connecting Aegor's words with the visions she had seen in the flames, her mind began piecing things together. The boy possesses the physique of a divine messenger, and the demigod wanted him. What is a demigod? Aegor asked, keeping his tone even. A demigod is a being weaker than my master, the Lord of Light, but far superior to mortals. Think of them as powerful wizards, she replied. And what exactly is the physique of a divine messenger? Aegor continued. Also, if the demigod wanted to use the boy, why did it cripple him? Melisandre's expression was calm as she explained. The so-called divine physique refers to a person's natural affinity for the divine. Some people can easily perceive the messages the Lord of Light conveys through fire. Others require assistance, and still others will never hear the Lord's voice no matter what. Interestingly, those with the highest divine affinity often have extraordinary talents for magic. They possess strong, healthy bodies, resilient souls, and unyielding wills. These advantages, however, can hinder divine communication, more precisely, hinder the divine from communicating with them. And so you saw what happened next. Aegor felt a chill run down his spine as her words sank in. He suddenly understood what she meant. Among the free folk, only 1 in 1,000 is born a skinchanger, and among those, only 1 in 1,000 can become a greenseer. Bran Stark, with his exceptional skinchanger abilities, was the perfect candidate to inherit the mantle of the next greenseer. But because of his strength, the old greenseer couldn't simply control or manipulate him. Instead, the greenseer chose a cruel solution to temporarily weaken Bran. Even the nature of the inheritance seemed suspect. Did the previous greenseer pass on all his knowledge and memories to Bran, or did he take over Bran's body entirely, viewing his life across time and space before impersonating him? This line of thought was so disturbing that Aegor needed confirmation. "Let me see if I understand this," he said carefully. If someone is healthy, whole, and conscious, a demigod cannot easily influence them. But if that person is unconscious, physically weakened, or mentally broken, the demigod can take the opportunity to infiltrate their mind and exert greater control. In theory, yes, Melisandre said with a dazzling smile. But resorting to direct harm is usually a last, desperate measure. Often when a person's heart is filled with doubt or emptiness, a demigod can exploit that vulnerability just as effectively. That's a tactic used by the weak. My Lord of Light has no need for such underhanded methods. So long as there is fire, his grace can reach anywhere. My lord is far more powerful than the one you fought. Her response only solidified Aegor's suspicions. The day Bran Stark fell was the day before he was supposed to leave Winterfell for King's Landing with his father. The Greenseer had orchestrated the tragedy to prevent his ideal successor from leaving the North, his sphere of influence. The pieces began to fit together in Aegor's mind. Bran's dreams of the three-eyed raven after his fall, Jojen Reed's arrival as a guide, Jojen, whose green dreams foretold the future but left him frail and sickly, and other individuals who claimed to possess prophetic insight. It all made sense now. The Greenseer had wanted Bran crippled to ensure he remained in the North. While Bran lay unconscious, the Greenseer likely implanted dreams and messages urging him to go beyond the wall to fulfill his destiny. Jojen, already under the Greenseer's sway, would then guide Bran to him. It was cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless, but one part still puzzled Aegor. He had witnessed Bran's fall with his own eyes, and the event had seemed entirely accidental. He needed to know how the Greenseer had caused it. But it was clearly an accident, he said. "You're dealing with a demigod, my friend of the Night's Watch," Melisandre said, her tone dripping with disdain. "What you saw was an accident, but was it truly one? Demigods spread their influence through faith, persuading others to act on their behalf. Within this sphere of influence, they can subtly manipulate people's thoughts. No god can directly control a person's mind, but through whispered suggestions deep in the subconscious and careful arrangements, they can orchestrate events. What they wish to happen will manifest as a series of coincidences. The heart tree, the old gods." Aegor's voice trembled as the realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He suddenly understood everything. Melisandre's sharp eyes narrowed as she observed his reaction. She gave a small nod, then shook her head slightly, a wordless signal for him to stop speaking. Her expression and gestures confirmed Aegor's worst fears. The so-called old gods were merely a facade, a construct of the Greenseers. Or perhaps the old gods were the Greenseers. By promoting this belief, the Greenseers had encouraged the children of the forest and the first men to plant weirwoods everywhere, creating a vast network through which they could extend their influence. The Greenseer didn't just see the world through the weirwoods, he could manipulate it. And Bran's Fall, less than 200 meters from where it happened, stood the Godswood of Winterfell. Through the Heart Tree, the Greenseer had likely influenced Bran's subconscious, compelling him to climb the broken tower that day. At the same time, he had stirred the forbidden desires of Jaime and Cersei, ensuring they would be there when Bran arrived. A few nudges here, a whisper there, and the accident was complete. Aegor's blood ran cold. By intervening repeatedly to try to prevent Bran's fall, he had unwittingly drawn the Greenseer's attention. Melisandre had said he carried the aura of a powerful being. Could it be that he had already crossed paths with the Greenseer? No, with the old god. Thank the gods I didn't succeed, he thought, sweat soaking his black tunic. As the implications of Melisandre's explanation sank in, Aegor's mind raced to another possibility. Wasn't it the same principle when Melisandre burned 3 leeches to curse and kill 3 false kings? Robb Stark was killed by the Freys, who had conspired with the Lannisters at the Red Wedding. On the surface, it seemed to have nothing to do with the 3 leeches. But the king in the north's stubborn willfulness, his betrayal of his oath to House Frey, and the ultimate choices of the 2 treacherous families, could all of this have been the result of whispers and subtle provocations buried deep in their subconscious? Could it have been Arlor's influence at work? Joffrey Baratheon was poisoned by Littlefinger and Olenna Tyrell, which also appeared unrelated to the leeches. Yet consider this, Petyr Baelish took enormous risks to orchestrate chaos that yielded no clear benefit to himself. Meanwhile, the Queen of Thorns, Olenna Tyrell, was willing to kill her own granddaughter's future husband to save her from marrying Joffrey, a monster with echoes of the Mad King's cruelty. The 2 conspirators aligned their plans perfectly, joining forces to kill the king. Could this perfect storm of collaboration have been induced by subtle hints and manipulations from the Lord of Light? As for Balon Greyjoy, he was believed to have fallen to his death while crossing a stormy bridge. But his long-exiled brother, Euron Greyjoy, who returned to the Iron Islands immediately after Balon's death, was the true culprit. Euron had been absent from Westeros for years, claiming to have traveled the world. How then did he manage to return at the critical moment of the War of the Five Kings, ensuring that Melisandre's curse came to fruition? The red-robed woman's curse couldn't directly kill its targets, but the King of Light behind her ensured that those she cursed would always be slain by someone with the motive and means to kill them. Subconscious interference and whispers in the ears, these seem to be the methods through which the gods of this world manipulate events, turning mortals into their pawns and wielding them as tools to strike at one another. Is it possible that this Game of Thrones, this battle between life and death, this Song of Ice and Fire, is nothing more than a power struggle between gods and demigods fighting for influence over the mortal world? In this world, can one truly get anywhere without noble status? While the statement might sound absolute, it is almost always true in Westeros. No one is born untouchable. Once you enter this world, you have to play by its rules. But Aegor saw beyond the surface, past the aristocratic system that seemed to define everything. The noble system was merely a visible layer of the game in Westeros. Beneath it lay the deeper, more fundamental rules. Every problem was ultimately one of resources and power. Take the messenger from the Iron Bank, for example. He was just an ordinary clerk, yet even Queen Cersei, who had purged all her political opponents and wielded supreme power in King's Landing, had to treat him with courtesy. Was it because of his title? No, it was because he represented the immense resources of Braavos across the narrow sea. Or look at the High Sparrow, whose rise to power caused so many kings and queens untold trouble. Was his influence derived from his title or the favor of the 7 gods? No, it stemmed from his armed followers and the public's support, combined with the weaknesses of his enemies. Even Littlefinger, after being granted Harrenhal, became one of the highest-ranking nobles in Westeros. But if he hadn't already forged ties with the Lady of the Vale, what would his noble title have truly amounted to? In the end, nobility in Westeros was a tool for controlling resources, not the source of power itself. In this world, control over resources came first, nobility followed after. Once you understood this cause-and-effect relationship, the path forward became clear. If Aegor could amass resources, even if he spent his entire life branded as a member of the Night's Watch, legally no better than a common soldier, he could still achieve great things with a mere gesture. Firmly believing this, Aegor began to plan. His initial strategy had been simple. Use a Ponzi scheme to amass capital, channeling the profits into supplies for the Night's Watch while strategically placing people loyal to him within its ranks. Slowly but steadily, he intended to make the Watch dependent on him, both materially and ideologically. This would ensure his personal safety and grant him freedom of action. With that foundation secured, he could then use his resources and advanced knowledge to establish a vast network of influence throughout Westeros. When the time was right, he would carefully leverage his power to participate in the Game of Thrones, remove the shackles of his Night's Watch identity, and ultimately explore the possibility of revering his time travel. Aegor had laid out this ambitious plan, eager to employ his wisdom and knowledge in navigating the chaotic world of Westeros. But before he could even begin, Melisandre had appeared and in doing so had pulled back the curtain on this world, revealing a greater and far more terrifying truth beneath its surface. A month ago, Aegor had doubted the existence of fate when he failed to prevent Bran Stark's fall. But when Tyrion successfully returned to King's Landing, it overturned his earlier suspicions. Convinced that there was no such thing as destiny or divine interference in this world, Aegor had grown ambitious, crafting an enormous plan to reshape Westeros and rewrite its history. But now Melisandre's words hit him like a hammer to the head. Supernatural powers did exist and they were influencing the mortal realm. Tyrion's return hadn't disproved this. It simply meant that the gods had been too preoccupied elsewhere to interfere. Aegor felt like a child, quietly preparing to play games or watch movies in his room, only to look up and notice a camera on the ceiling. The excitement drained from him immediately. Who could remain cheerful while being watched, scrutinized from all angles by an all-seeing father-like presence? Melisandre observed Aegor's prolonged silence and mistook it for fear. She inwardly scoffed. Even a man who had faced White Walkers and killed one trembled when confronted with true supernatural power. "Do you have any other questions?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. After all, it was natural for mortals to fear the extraordinary. She herself had felt this awe before. "Since I've been so forthcoming, would it be acceptable if I asked a few questions in return?" Aegor's plans needed to change. It wasn't enough to keep a low profile in the eyes of Westeros' nobility. He now realized he would also need to stay under the radar of the demigods and gods that influenced this world. Half of the plans he had painstakingly crafted could be scrapped right then and there. "Ask," he said, his voice calm despite the turmoil inside. "I'll tell you everything I know." Over the next half hour, Aegor and Melisandre exchanged questions and answers. Though still somewhat shaken, Aegor forced himself to maintain composure. To his relief, all of Melisandre's inquiries focused on matters beyond the wall and at the wall itself. This meant she hadn't doubted his identity as an ordinary ranger of the Night's Watch. So long as he told the truth, there was no need to fabricate any stories or risk exposing himself. By the time their conversation ended, the Red Priestess wore a somber expression, clearly deep in thought. Aegor, meanwhile, used the brief reprieve to steady himself and work through his panic. At last, reason returned, belated but better late than never. Aegor realized that conspiracy theories could explain everything, but leaning too heavily on them was a sure way to scare himself into paralysis. He had deceived plenty of key figures in this world using half-truths and misdirection. Who was to say Melisandre wasn't doing the same? And even if she believed what she said, it didn't necessarily mean it was true. As a devout follower of the Red God, Melisandre might very well be brainwashed, no different from Jojen Reed, who was manipulated by his green dreams. Was the Red God real? Was Melisandre simply another pawn in the game of a higher power? It was possible that many events in the original plot had indeed been orchestrated or influenced by supernatural beings. But if Aegor started viewing everyone and everything through that lens, wondering which god they served or what divine agenda they represented, he would end up paralyzed. Better to abandon such thoughts entirely and focus on what was within his grasp, surviving, building his influence, and continuing his fight against the White Walkers. Even if there really is a group of beings quietly influencing the real world on a subconscious level, if there's no way to identify who they've affected or what these gods actually want, then how different are they from not existing at all? Regardless of these transcendent forces, the plan remains the same. Just a few adjustments to make oneself more low-key. Aegor's thoughts were clear, and he quickly formulated a countermeasure. From now on, he would need to pretend to be a loyal and upright Night's Watchman, not only when meeting outsiders but even when no one was watching. Compared to acting recklessly for selfish goals, standing firmly against the White Walkers might not bring immediate benefits, but it would at least ensure that the Lord of Light and his followers wouldn't target him without cause. "As a mortal, I am far too weak, not even qualified to remain neutral in this conflict. What a predicament. The god of cold is moving faster than we expected," Melisandre said, unaware of Aegor's inner thoughts. She had her own troubles. "Thankfully, the Lord of Light has shown me in the flames that the Great Wall can block the power of the god of cold and his servants. We still have time to prepare before winter comes and the sea freezes over." She raised her head and looked at Aegor, her demeanor growing serious as she shook off any unnecessary expressions. "So, my friend in black, is there anything I can do to help the Night's Watch?" Aegor met her gaze. After everything, the accusations of heresy, the bloodletting, and the tension, things finally seemed to be back on track. At the very least, Melisandre wasn't lying about wanting to help the Night's Watch. Unfortunately, Dragonstone had limited resources. The island couldn't provide food or weapons, and Melisandre didn't have a large following of her own. Unless she was willing to abandon Stannis, whom she mistakenly believed to be the reincarnation of Azor Ahai, and head north to the Wall herself, her ability to help would be limited. As he stared at the priestess, her face serious and sincere, a question began to form in Aegor's mind, growing larger and heavier. Was the struggle between these gods truly a battle for survival, or was it simply a game, a competition among themselves? In the eyes of these higher beings, were the White Walkers, the Night's Watch, and even priests like Melisandre merely soldiers and weapons in a war, or were they pawns used in passing to amuse these gods in their spare time? If he could figure this out, his plans could be revised with far greater precision and clarity. Unfortunately, even if Melisandre was a devout servant of the Lord of Light, there was no way she could know secrets on this level. The Great Wall lacks everything, Aegor finally said, sighing and shaking his head. But what it needs most right now is people, food, and equipment. I was sent here to address that, but I think Dragonstone is in no better position than the Night's Watch. If you truly wish to help, then focus on ensuring the mining of obsidian progresses smoothly. No problem. Wait, Dragonglass. Aegor's eyes widened slightly as a thought struck him. How could he have overlooked something so important? I almost forgot to ask, he said quickly, leaning forward slightly. Do you know how the Dragonglass dagger kills White Walkers? If we can figure out the secret behind it, we might be able to find other ways to deal with these creatures. I don't know, but I can make a guess, Melisandre said, pursing her lips as she looked at Aegor. After all, the first White Walker killer in Westeros in 1,000 years is sitting right here, isn't he? The earlier tension in the room had subsided, replaced by a more amicable atmosphere. This old witch, who had clearly lived for who knows how many centuries, was disturbingly good at steering conversations.
Author's note: in this chapter, Aegor treads the line between mortal and divine, caught in forces he barely understands. Power, foresight, and deception collide, showing that even the cleverest plans are fragile against the unseen. Sometimes, survival is simply knowing when to speak and when to watch.
Aegor, unable to find an appropriate response, kept his expression neutral and said curtly, "Stop spouting nonsense and get on with your guess. From the images I saw in the death process you described, the White Walker's body seems to be almost entirely composed of magic with little physical substance," the witch explained. All living beings can be killed either by physical force or magic, but there are entities capable of making physical attacks almost meaningless, immune to physical damage. Aegor asked, "In nature, some animals strengthen their bodies to achieve this goal, like turtles or dragons. They rely on tough shells or scales to resist external, physical harm, but the gods take other approaches. The god of cold took the opposite route. He made his servants' bodies almost entirely magical, granting the White Walkers near-complete immunity to physical attacks. Unless they are utterly pulverized by overwhelming force, they are essentially immortal." "Then why are they vulnerable to dragonglass?" Aegor pressed. "They aren't afraid of dragonglass itself, but rather the fire magic imbued within it," Melisandre said confidently. "This magic is fundamentally opposed to the essence of the god of cold servants. The conflict disrupts the ice magic that holds their bodies together, causing them to collapse. Isn't the Lord of Light the god of fire? Since you call yourself his servant, shouldn't you be skilled in fire magic?" Aegor asked pointedly. "In truth, fire magic is the only kind I know," Melisandre admitted. "But if you expect me to head north to the wall and help you fight the White Walkers, that won't happen. Not only do I have a more critical mission, but the truth is, I can't even deal with a single White Walker." "Are you telling me that the fire magic you can use isn't as effective as the magic in an obsidian dagger?" Aegor asked skeptically. "Did you forget what I said earlier? The god of cold is the mortal enemy of the Lord of Light. If his servants could be slain by minor fire magic, this war would have ended thousands of years ago," the witch countered, shaking her head. "We just mentioned that the bodies of White Walkers are almost entirely magic, but almost isn't the same as completely. If they were pure magic, even a small fire spell could disperse them. However, the small amount of physical substance in their bodies prevents this from happening." Melisandre raised a hand, her fingers brushing lightly across the fabric of Aegor's black shirt. "If I wanted to, I could instantly ignite all the clothing on your body. You'd suffer severe burns, perhaps even die if you didn't get treatment. But what do you think would happen if I tried this trick on a White Walker?" Aegor stepped back, avoiding her touch. "It wouldn't burn them at all." "Correct, they wouldn't burn at all," Melisandre replied with a faint smile, retracting her hand. "White Walkers' bodies are entirely composed of magic, with a thin layer of ice acting as armor. Ordinary weapons can shatter this ice layer easily, but they cannot harm the essence beneath. Fire magic poses a threat to them, but it cannot pierce their physical bodies. The existence of this body means that even if they were buried in dragonglass or engulfed in flames, they would remain intact. Only by piercing their bodies and injecting fire magic can their internal magic be disrupted, destabilizing their structure and killing them. That's how you killed the White Walker with a dragonglass dagger. The dagger's sharpness broke through their protective exterior, and the fire magic within the dragonglass disrupted the stable ice magic in their bodies, killing them instantly." She paused briefly before continuing. "Of course, sufficiently powerful fire magic could destroy them outright, but no one capable of casting fire magic at that level has been born yet." "Then, what's the story behind Valyrian steel being able to kill White Walkers?" Aegor asked. "Valyrian steel is a misleading name. To be more accurate, it should be called Valyrian metal. If you ever get the chance, test it with a magnet. You'll see it contains no iron and therefore cannot be classified as steel. The Valyrians combined several rare and precious metals with magic to forge this remarkably light and durable material. I've encountered it before, and it's evident that exceptionally powerful fire magic was used in its creation. Even after centuries, traces of that magic remain. An alloy then? Valyrian steel should be called Valyrian alloy, Aegor remarked. Melisandre frowned slightly, puzzled by his penchant for inventing new terms. Call it whatever you like, the name doesn't matter. I see. So the most effective way to kill White Walkers is to pierce their bodies and use substances containing fire magic to destabilize their structure, Aegor said, nodding. A sudden thought made his expression darken. But what if I encounter a White Walker wearing armor? How could I kill them then? Generally speaking, armor greatly hinders movement and spellcasting. Magic as a form of energy lacks strong penetration, which is why spellcasters typically wear simple, lightweight clothing. I, for example, never wear undergarments or heavy robes. If I were forced to wear full armor, the power of my spells would be halved at least, Melisandre said, her lips curving into a sly smile. But there's no guarantee the White Walkers will adopt your logic. If you do encounter one wearing armor, my advice is simple: go back and think carefully about your next move. Realizing he had spent far too much time here, he stood abruptly and said, "You're saying a lot of words, but they mean nothing." "Indeed," Melisandre replied, standing as well, her tone unbothered. "But you, my friend, are an expert in killing White Walkers, aren't you? Are you leaving already? Well, I've already removed the mark left in your body by the demigod, and the lingering aura of the Lord of Light will now ensure that he dares neither monitor you nor harm you. You are free to do as you wish." "You removed one mark but replaced it with another." Aegor froze for a moment, the words sinking in. His recently subdued anger flared up again. "What's the point of that? They're all the same, they're not good people. Wherever there is fire, the Lord of Light's influence can reach. With his mark, demigods hostile to the god of cold or other servants of the Lord of Light will not harm you. And if you're worried that I'll constantly watch you, I can assure you I lack both the ability and the interest," Melisandre said calmly, unaffected by his outburst. "This has already consumed my magic. It's my way of apologizing for the offense I caused earlier. Believe me or not, it's up to you. The only regret I have is that I can't remove the traces left on you by the god of cold. Regarding that, I can only suggest, don't go north of the wall again." Aegor wanted to demand that she undo whatever manipulations she had left on his body, but as he thought it over, he realized something. Even if she lied and claimed she had undone it, how would he know for sure? He couldn't sense magic. It was better to ask something practical. "Didn't you say the aura left by the god of cold on me is weak? So why can you remove the stronger mark but not the weaker one?" "An adult wolf can kill a newborn dragon with a single bite, but even so, a dragon is a fundamentally stronger creature than a wolf," Melisandre explained with a soft sigh. "The god of cold is evil, yes, but he is a true god, one who has just awakened after a long slumber. As winter deepens, his power will grow stronger and stronger. In contrast, the unfortunate demigod opposing him in the north is already in decline, inching closer to death." She looked at Aegor, her tone turning thoughtful. "The night is dark and full of terrors. Take care of yourself, my Night's Watch friend. And one last thing, tell the guard outside that we've reached an understanding and this misunderstanding should end. We all have more important matters to deal with, don't we?" Aegor hesitated at the door. Her calm yet earnest tone left no room for further argument. After a moment's pause, he nodded curtly, then pushed the door open and walked out. In Winterfell, there would always be a butler or servant busy making arrangements to ensure someone like Aegor had proper accommodations for the night. But this was Dragonstone, and the word polite likely didn't exist in Stannis Baratheon's vocabulary. Under the guidance of a guard, Aegor quickly found himself outside the castle gates. Facing the dark night, the kind-hearted guard handed him a torch. Of course, there were no wolves or White Walkers on the island, and for a Night's Watch ranger, walking a few miles at night was hardly a daunting task. Bathed in the bleak moonlight, Aegor made his way down toward the fishing village along the shore. The ship hadn't left yet. And Aegor breathed a sigh of relief. The captain, along with the old miner and his son, nervously asked what had happened. Naturally, Aegor couldn't reveal the truth to these ordinary folk. Instead, he fabricated a simple excuse about a misunderstanding to put their minds at ease. After retrieving his wallet, he headed straight for his cabin. The return journey from Dragonstone to King's Landing differed from the trip there. They were now sailing against the wind and current, which slowed their progress considerably. Even if they set out in the middle of the night, Dragonstone would still be visible on the horizon by dawn. With no other choice, the ship remained docked in Dragonstone's small port for the rest of the night, only departing at first light. Standing at the stern and watching the island slowly recede into the distance, Aegor couldn't help but sigh. Arranging the mining of dragonglass had originally been a side project, something to do amidst other, more pressing concerns. According to the original plan, the task of managing the mine would fall to the old miner and his son. Aegor had intended to simply provide funding and avoid further involvement. Who could have anticipated that such a short trip would embroil him in the conflict between the god of fire and the god of cold? Moreover, he had learned so much inside information from Melisandre, though whether any of it was true remained uncertain. Since there was no way to discern truth from lies, Aegor resolved to stop dwelling on it. The only thing to do now was to focus on the present. It was time to get back to business. The ship drifted against the Blackwater Rush for more than a day and night, its waters rushing eastward into the narrow sea, before finally reaching the port of King's Landing. 4 days after departing the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, Aegor set foot on Westerosi soil once again. After briefly discussing his address and next steps with the old miner, Aegor entered the city through the Mud Gate, eventually returning to the Albatross Inn where he had stayed previously. Tyrion Lannister hadn't gone out, and as soon as he heard that Aegor had returned, he knocked on his door. "Finally, you're back. During the 2 days you spent at Dragonstone, I didn't even feel like going to the tavern or the brothel," Tyrion said by way of greeting. The dwarf's comment left Aegor utterly baffled. Thankfully, Tyrion quickly clarified. "I've been mulling over the finance idea you mentioned during our last conversation. I couldn't stop thinking about it day and night over and over. I couldn't eat or sleep because of it. Have you figured anything out?" Aegor asked, slightly surprised by how invested Tyrion seemed. Compared to being randomly accused of heresy by Melisandre and dragged into a bloodletting ritual, this conversation was entirely within Aegor's expectations. Men like Eddard Stark or Stannis Baratheon would likely dismiss the concept of financial schemes as outright fraud. But Tyrion was different. The hallmark of a clever man was his ability to examine new ideas objectively and rationally. That was precisely why Aegor preferred dealing with people like Tyrion. It saved effort. You must have realized by now that if the Game of Thrones is about fighting for power and dividing the spoils, then the game of money is about growing the spoils, making the cake bigger, so to speak. Regardless of which is more important or complex when it comes to contributing to the world, the latter is undoubtedly greater than the former, Aegor explained. "I'm not going to argue with that," Tyrion replied, his expression sharp. "But don't think you can get away with twisting concepts to confuse me, at least not with me." Tyrion's calm rebuttal was refreshing to Aegor, though it was hard to take him seriously when he tried to look stern. It almost came off as comical. "No matter how you dress it up, no matter how you justify it, you have to admit that this is a scam," Tyrion added bluntly. As expected, there was no fooling a smart man. 4 days had been more than enough time for Tyrion to figure out the truth. Aegor felt a flicker of nervousness as he scrambled to think of a way to respond. Tyrion cut him off, seeing the hesitation in his expression. "Don't bother making excuses, just admit it." "Fine, I admit it," Aegor said. His mind quickly shifted gears and he realized something. If Tyrion truly intended to reject the idea, he wouldn't have bothered saying so much. His tone didn't suggest outright refusal, and that gave Aegor a glimmer of hope. "Yes, I tried to pull off a financial scam. In Cena there was a man named Charles Ponzi who used a similar trick to deceive tens of thousands of people. Because of that, this kind of scam is now called a Ponzi scheme." "How was his scam exposed?" Tyrion asked curiously. "In order to compete with legitimate financial ventures, he promised ridiculously high rates of return. But he didn't make any real investments or generate any actual profits. Worse still, he squandered much of the money he raised. His scheme collapsed quickly because the flow of capital dried up. Once he couldn't even pay the promised returns, excluding the principal, his scam fell apart. Even if the investors hadn't suspected him, it wouldn't have lasted." "It's just as I deduced," Tyrion said, raising his eyebrows and solemnly announcing, "Aegor, I'll join your plan as long as you agree to my 3 conditions." Just like that, standing at the door of an ordinary single room in the Albatross Inn, Aegor felt a sudden inexplicable throbbing in his chest. It struck him that this simple and straightforward conversation between friends could very well shape the future of Westeros. After a full second of silence, he nodded. "Go on. First, every step of this whole fundraising endeavor must be discussed with me in detail, and you must explain your reasoning clearly. I must be allowed to participate fully. Second, the account funds will be managed by me. The money will be kept in an independent house I rent, and I'll personally handle all incoming and outgoing transactions." Tyrion straightened his expression, trying to emphasize that he wasn't joking. "Third, if the plan fails, I will cover the shortfall. But you are not allowed to attempt this scheme elsewhere without my approval. I'll find something else for you to do. With your brains, you can live comfortably without resorting to scams. That's all. Decide." The first 2 conditions were easy enough to understand. Aegor's calculated approach and the mutual trust between the two had helped them grow close in just a few months, despite being from vastly different worlds. However, they had only known each other for a short time, and Tyrion likely feared that Aegor might squander money recklessly, as the original perpetrators of Ponzi schemes had done, or worse, abscond with a massive sum. Aegor had no such intentions, so he readily accepted the restrictions. With King's Landing being the population and economic center of Westeros, and with both a northern hand of the king and a Lannister to cooperate with, it should be feasible to raise funds. If it couldn't work here, why try elsewhere? Aegor didn't hesitate. "Your requests are reasonable, I agree to all of them." "Very good." The dwarf appreciated Aegor's straightforwardness. He nodded, then gave his friend a once-over, his expression shifting into a frown. "Did you really go to Dragonstone? You look like you've been in a brothel for 3 days and 3 nights. You're utterly exhausted." "Is it that obvious?" Aegor muttered. He couldn't help but replay Melisandre's words in his mind, still struggling to separate truth from lies. Tyrion didn't even believe in the existence of White Walkers. When it came to skepticism, this native of Westeros might surpass even Aegor himself. I'm seasick and didn't sleep well. Do you want a rest? I'll write up a list first. You can have Morales and Jack do the shopping. I'll take a nap, and once everything's in place, we can begin. Excellent, I can't wait. Tyrion's excitement was palpable. He was like a child about to unbox a long-awaited toy. The game of money, just thinking about it feels more thrilling than drinking or spending time with women. Tyrion, you might be the most adventurous man in Westeros I've ever met. HMPH, Tyrion grunted, unimpressed by the flattery. As you said, I'm only the most adventurous Westerosi. This venture doesn't interfere with my drinking or carousing, nor does it put my life at risk. That's why I find it more interesting than the other two and why I'm willing to try it. Compared to someone like you who's crossed the sunset sea to get here, I'm nothing more than a country bumpkin. Let's not waste time complimenting each other, Aegor replied with a smirk. I'll write up the list of supplies we need immediately, this afternoon. We'll start preparing to issue the Night's Watch bonds. After a short nap and confirming with Yoren that they wouldn't be leaving for the Wall in the next few days, Aegor and Tyrion set out together, discussing details as they rode. Any form of fundraising is a scam at the beginning, Aegor began. The difference between legitimate finance and outright fraud is this. In the former, cheating people out of their money is just the initial step, not the ultimate goal. What we're doing, or at least what we hope to be doing, falls into the first category. To achieve that, we need to establish a formal and complete system that not only appears legitimate but actually functions as such. He glanced at Tyrion. This requires a whole set of rules and regulations to govern everyone involved, not just you and me. And since you've asked for details, let's start there. Very well, go ahead, Tyrion replied, gesturing for him to continue. I'll listen and offer suggestions where I can. All right. Aegor had thought everything through meticulously in his room and now laid it out with clarity. A mature financial system has to account for many factors: stability, order, growth, but since we're just getting started, we only need to focus on one thing: stability, specifically stability of the capital chain. Since our main source of funds is borrowing, ensuring stability means making sure our creditors don't suddenly demand repayment en masse. Tyrion nodded, though he was struggling to keep up with the flood of unfamiliar terms and concepts. You mentioned interest. Yes, interest, or rather the return on investment, Aegor explained. I casually set the rate at 1% per month earlier, but after thinking it through, that figure is quite reasonable. The lower the return rate, the lower the risk of the entire operation collapsing. It's a moderate figure, low enough to be sustainable. However, we'll need to implement additional rules to support it. The method is simple. When borrowing money, we'll agree on a repayment period. If repayment is delayed, interest will continue to accrue. If repayment is made early, there will be penalties. Penalties? Tyrion asked, raising an eyebrow. Borrowing money is already a request for help. Who would dare to pay up if you start talking about penalties? Calm down. The penalties won't affect the principal, Aegor assured him. The principal will always remain secure no matter what. The penalty will only apply to the interest, the profit portion. And remember, we're operating under the guise of raising funds for the Night's Watch, with the Lord Hand of the King's endorsement. Officially, the money is for purchasing food and equipment to defend the Wall against wildlings and White Walkers. This is a noble cause, one that few would object to. While it's true that everything is being managed by just the two of us, and only part of the funds will go where we claim the debtor isn't me, it's the Night's Watch. Aegor paused to let the point sink in before continuing. This distinction is critical. I represent the Night's Watch. Even though the organization is in decline and Southerners look down on it, it's still legally independent and on par with the great houses of Westeros. As such, it must act impartially and responsibly. To maintain that facade, we need strict principles that seem overbearing but ultimately work in our favor. The most important of these is that our bonds will not be redeemable before the agreed-upon time. You make a valid point, Tyrion admitted, but you're underestimating how unreasonable people can be. I don't know how things work in Cena or wherever you claim to be from, but here in Westeros, those rules could backfire and cause widespread panic. You're not wrong, rules are dead but people are alive. If creditors are truly desperate for repayment, we won't strictly enforce the rules. However, there must still be consequences, Aegor said. For instance, if a creditor redeems their bonds early after more than 2 months, a 1% handling fee will apply. That means they lose 1 month's worth of interest. If they redeem within 1 month and the interest doesn't cover the handling fee, we'll waive it, but they'll face other penalties. For example, I might refuse to lend to that person again. Refuse to lend to them again? Tyrion laughed, then paused when he saw Aegor's serious expression. You can't be serious. Who would beg for the privilege of lending you money? It does sound a bit arrogant, doesn't it? Aegor admitted. Let's put it another way, such individuals will be disqualified from purchasing Night's Watch bonds in the future, unless of course they pay the handling fee for their defaulted bonds first. It might sound ridiculous, but reality often defies logic. Tyrion's skepticism remained. I'll believe it when I see it. Fair enough, Aegor conceded. A 1% monthly return isn't enticing enough on its own. That's why we need incentives as well as penalties. Incentive 1, after 3 months, no handling fee will apply to redemptions. Incentive 2, interest increases over time. For example, the interest for the third month might rise to 1.5%, the sixth month to 2%, the ninth month to 2.5%, and the 12th month to 3%. Every 3 months the rate increases by 0.5%. That's still too much, Tyrion said, shaking his head. Not at all, it applies only to the current month, not cumulatively. It's perfectly manageable, Aegor clarified. Think about it, after 3 months the creditor earns 3.5%, after 6 months 7.5%, after 9 months 12%, and after a full year 17%. This structure makes the return rate attractive enough. Creditors will naturally conclude that the longer their money stays with me, the higher the return. Imagine you had 100 gold dragons. If you left it untouched at home for a year, it would still be 100. But if you lent it to me, it would grow to 117 by year's end. What would you choose? Indeed, it's attractive enough. Arithmetic had always been one of Tyrion's strong suits, but compared to Aegor, who seemed to possess a methodical, almost clinical understanding of numbers, he felt like a rank amateur. Since meeting Aegor, Tyrion found himself being persuaded more often than he had in the past 20 years combined. I get it now. Not only that, but the people who lend you money will eventually form a habitual mindset. The longer they leave the money with you, the more they'll earn. Unless they're in a true emergency, they'll avoid redeeming it. Exactly. Now think a bit deeper, Aegor said, his tone steady and deliberate. Imagine you're a creditor who's lent the Night's Watch 100 gold dragons. Let's say it's been 11 months or 11.5 months. Suddenly your family encounters an emergency and you urgently need the money. If you redeem the bond now, the return will be calculated for 11 months, meaning you'll receive 100 gold dragons plus 11 months interest, 114 gold dragons. But if you wait just another half a month, that 114 becomes 117. However, because of the urgency, you can't wait. What would you do? Tyrion furrowed his brow, considering the scenario. After a moment, his expression brightened as he found the answer. I'd sell the bond to someone else for 115 or 116 gold dragons. That way I can solve my problem, and the person buying the bond still gets to earn 1 or 2 gold dragons in just a matter of days. Exactly, and what does that imply? Tyrion mulled it over again, his mind racing. After a few seconds, a realization dawned on him, a realization both thrilling and unsettling. In that case, the Night's Watch bonds you've issued can effectively serve as 115 or 116 gold dragons. In other words, those bonds function almost like what you called banknotes earlier. Precisely, Aegor confirmed, nodding with a faint smile. But for that to happen, society at large would need to recognize the reliability and value of the Night's Watch bonds. That's a long road ahead. If we're fortunate, we might see it in our lifetime. More likely, however, the king will recognize the potential of finance, issue his own royal bonds, and squeeze us out of the market entirely. He chuckled softly. True finance is 1,000 times more complex than this, but we're only taking the first steps. No need to overthink the distant future now. Which way should we turn at this intersection? Aegor had just arrived in King's Landing and naturally didn't know his way around. Fortunately, Tyrion had lived in the city long enough to navigate it with ease. While not an expert on every street, he had no trouble finding their destination. As they talked, they soon arrived at the only professional seal-making shop in King's Landing, and one of the few in all of Westeros. Westeros in this era was far behind the modern world Aegor had known before crossing over. However, as the Seven Kingdoms unified and developed, people had begun to grasp the importance of law and order. Seals in this world followed specific formats and were subject to certain regulations. You couldn't just carve one out of stone and expect it to be recognized. In King's Landing, only seals made at the shop were guaranteed to be accepted by nobles and wealthy individuals throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Seal shops typically served only people of status or those with fixed assets, as ordinary folk had no need for them. Aegor, a Night's Watchman, didn't meet these criteria. Fortunately, he had 2 powerful credentials, letters signed and sealed by Eddard Stark and Jeor Mormont. After inspecting these documents, the shopkeeper agreed to take on Aegor's business. He ordered a seal for himself with the title Chief Logistics Officer of the Night's Watch. While such a position didn't currently exist within the Night's Watch, Aegor planned to establish it soon as part of his broader strategy. Aegor commissioned 2 seals, one for official correspondence and one for personal identification. After settling on the design and content with the engraver, he turned to Tyrion. "Do you have a seal?" "No," Tyrion replied honestly. It was uncommon for someone of his rank not to have a seal, but his situation was unique. His disability and distinctive appearance meant his identity as a Lannister was rarely questioned. The family's reputation for paying its debts often served as sufficient proof in dealings with taverns, brothels, and merchants. Nobles, meanwhile, typically dealt with his father Tywin or his siblings. Though Tyrion pretended not to care, it was clear he had his own struggles with this reality. "I suppose I should get one as well." Tyrion's seal order was quickly arranged. As the infamous imp, he didn't need official credentials, but it was still a practical step. Regular seals were expensive, but compared to the scale of their plans, the cost was negligible. Once the seals were commissioned, they left the shop, mounted their horses, and headed for their next destination, discussing the details as they rode. Tyrion climbed onto his horse with some difficulty. And now, your servant has already bought the paper, ink, wax, and other supplies. Now we just need to visit the sign workshop, Aegor replied. The sign workshop, fine. But I wasn't asking where we're headed. I meant since you said this project needs my help, what exactly do you need me to do? A lot, Aegor admitted. With your involvement, we've skipped the hardest part of the plan and moved straight to the first major stage. If I were doing this alone, I'd have to raise interest rates to attract attention, then go around begging for every single gold dragon, scraping together initial loans from commoners through sheer persistence and all kinds of tricks. But with you on board, I can target middle and upper class lenders from the start. This lets me offer reasonable returns and set a minimum subscription threshold, fewer creditors, better quality, and a far more stable capital chain. The workload for fundraising operations is reduced exponentially. He paused, considering his words carefully. The first thing I need from you is to convince a few of your friends to buy these bonds, just a few. Once we've got that foundation, the rest will fall into place. Damn it, you want me to scam my own people, Tyrion said, half joking. Scam, Aegor feigned indignation. How can you say that? In this setup, the first group of creditors is the least likely to be cheated. All they need is a little persuasion from you to join. Once they're on board, their participation becomes a source of confidence for the next wave of lenders. As long as we control the total funds, the cycle can continue. Someone has to take the first step. If you're unwilling to convince your acquaintances, we'll be forced to take the bonds to the streets, knocking on doors like peddlers. Fine, I'll do it, Tyrion agreed, having already decided to invest his own money. This wasn't a matter of principle to him. Worst case, he could simply cover any shortfall himself. How do I convince them? It's simple. Introduce me to your friends and vouch for me. With the Commander-in-Chief's seal and the hand of the King's endorsement, it shouldn't be too difficult, Aegor said confidently. All right, you mentioned a subscription threshold. How much are we talking? 100 gold dragons. Tyrion's eyes widened. That much, Aegor. King's Landing might be the wealthiest city in the Seven Kingdoms, but asking someone I know to hand over 100 gold dragons is no small matter, especially when the money isn't being lent to me but to the Night's Watch. Many of these people may have never even seen a member of the Watch before. Asking them to throw that much into a cause they don't fully understand is ambitious. It's just a starting figure, Aegor explained. We're issuing fixed-rate simple-interest registered bonds. Remember the supplies I asked Morris and Jack to purchase? Each bond will be made from high-quality parchment, processed with anti-counterfeiting measures, and signed and sealed by all parties involved. Each bond will cost over a silver stag to produce. If we don't set a high minimum, we'd end up issuing hundreds, if not thousands, of bonds. That would be a logistical nightmare, not to mention it would increase costs and complicate management, threatening the stability of the capital chain. He added, of course, the 100 gold dragons figure is negotiable. We can adjust it if needed. Fixed interest, simple interest, registered bonds. What do these terms mean? Fixed interest means the interest rate remains constant. Simple interest means no additional interest will be calculated on the interest already accrued. Registered bonds mean the name of the holder is recorded on each bond. The first 2 points are for ease of accounting and management, while the third ensures the authenticity of the bonds and protects the holder's ownership in case of theft or loss. You'll understand these better when the time comes. It's complicated, Tyrion remarked, shaking his head slightly. The truly complicated parts are still ahead, Aegor replied with a faint smile. For now, let's focus on simpler issues like what to write on the sign for my Night's Watch office and what design to use. They eventually arrived at the sign workshop. Unlike the seal engraving shop or the planned Night's Watch office, the workshop required a large space for processing and production. To save on rent, it was situated in a more remote part of King's Landing. By the time they found the place, the sun was already setting. In the semi-open workspace, a dozen carpenters and laborers were busy at work. King's Landing saw the opening of new shops all the time, which meant a steady demand for new signs. Though the Seven Kingdoms were rife with political struggles and undercurrents of tension, the ordinary citizens remained blissfully unaware. On the surface, Westeros was enjoying an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity, with industry and commerce developing at remarkable speed. Aegor couldn't help but wonder, if the War of the Five Kings hadn't occurred and the long winter hadn't arrived, would cities like King's Landing have eventually sprouted the seeds of capitalism? The workshop owner greeted them warmly, assuring them that making a sign was far less troublesome than crafting a seal or unlocking a safe. As long as you pay, he said confidently, we can make it in any size or design you like. After half an hour of discussion, Aegor and Tyrion finalized the size and content of the sign and paid the deposit. By the time they returned to the inn after another exhausting day, the city was cloaked in darkness. They still couldn't rest even after nightfall. Aegor and Tyrion squeezed into their shared room, and under the dim light of a dozen candles, they began crafting the first-ever Night's Watch bonds. A stack of the finest quality parchment available in King's Landing sat on the table. After finalizing the content of the bonds through one last discussion, they began working. Tyrion's appearance might not inspire confidence, but his handwriting was elegant and refined. Aegor, on the other hand, had grown accustomed to using computers in his past life, and his handwriting, even if he could mimic the characters of Westeros, was subpar. As a result, the task of writing the first bond fell squarely on Tyrion's shoulders. The dwarf copied the draft carefully, word by word, without the slightest sloppiness, perhaps the most effort he had ever put into writing anything, even compared to letters to his father, Tywin Lannister. "Hugh," Tyrion exhaled as he carefully lifted the corners of the first sheet and blew on it to dry the ink. Setting it aside, he picked up a fresh sheet to continue. It had been a week since he returned to King's Landing, and for once, he hadn't visited a single brothel. He couldn't believe it himself. This sense of purpose, this work that filled the emptiness inside him, was almost intoxicating. Aegor, seated across from him, was absorbed in revising a draft. The parchment before him was covered in scribbles, words struck through and rewritten. He wasn't yet satisfied. The bond itself couldn't hold every rule or detail, it was just a piece of paper. He planned to draft a larger poster to hang in the Night's Watch office, explaining everything clearly to visitors. "Just jot down a basic outline for now and get some sleep," Tyrion suggested without looking up. "What matters isn't the bond's content but the signatures, seals, and anti-counterfeiting measures." "Yeah, I'll hire someone to handle it tomorrow," Tyrion added. "Hire someone to copy the bonds? Why bother? Find a shop to print them instead." Aegor's words trailed off as he realized he didn't know how to say print in Westeros' common tongue. "What are you trying to say?" Aegor struggled to explain, resorting to gestures and examples, but Tyrion still didn't understand. Finally, Aegor said, "Imagine taking the bond's content and turning it into an oversized seal, then stamping it onto each piece of parchment." "How clever, why didn't I think of that?" Tyrion's eyes lit up. "Is this another one of your Tsenar tricks? Your people are frighteningly innovative. Sometimes I'm grateful the Sunset Sea lies between us." "Wait, Westeros doesn't have this technology. How do you produce books?" "By copying them, of course," Tyrion answered casually. "There are scribes who do it for a living, painstakingly copying text for miserable wages." His voice trailed off and his expression shifted as realization struck. "Seven hells, are you saying?" Aegor came to the same conclusion. The reason he didn't know how to say print was simple. Printing didn't exist in this world. The two men stared at each other in stunned silence. Then, almost simultaneously, they thought the same thing. "This is a business opportunity." They immediately launched into a deeper discussion. Aegor asked Tyrion about the state of books in Westeros and quickly learned the shocking truth. Books in this era were copied entirely by hand, and their prices ranged from several silver stags to multiple gold dragons, depending on the neatness of the handwriting, the book's content and accuracy, and the quality of its binding. For some volumes, calling them luxuries would not be an exaggeration. "Is this why Tsena is so advanced and powerful?" Tyrion mused aloud, his quick mind grasping the implications immediately. He realized how printing could revolutionize the spread of knowledge and culture. This could change everything. We could open a printing house, sell books, and make a fortune. We could even fund it with the money from your bonds. "No, we shouldn't wait. I'll front the money myself and get started right away." But Aegor shook his head. "It's not that simple," he said. "With Westeros' current level of technology, printing might not even be cheaper than manual copying. If we put in the effort to create molds but only print a few dozen or a few hundred books, we'd lose money compared to just hearing scribes. And if we print in large volumes, the real issue arises: who's going to buy them?" Tyrion frowned but listened as Aegor continued. "You're a man of learning and refinement. Of course you'd hope for a world where everyone could read and appreciate books. But for now we need to focus on making money, not cultural advancements. The money we raise has to create immediate value. Otherwise, this becomes a Ponzi scheme that collapses under its own weight. We can't afford to print a bunch of excellent but highbrow books that no one will buy, even if they'd enrich the cultural landscape of Westeros in the long run." Aegor leaned back and sighed. "To put it simply, we need to focus on practical opportunities. If we're not part of the ruling class yet, it's a waste of time to think about reshaping the entire world." After pondering for a while, Aegor quickly identified several items that society urgently needed, ones with a massive market where printing costs would undoubtedly be cheaper than manual copying. Calendars, the 7 sacred scriptures, and ghost stories that were simple and entertaining for all ages. He could collaborate with institutions like the Faith of the Seven, local churches, or even bards to ensure the funds he raised were put to work effectively. The idea came so suddenly that it caught him off guard. Excitement surged through him, and with a flourish of his quill he crossed out an item on the original schedule. "What did you cross out?" Tyrion asked, noticing the sudden change. "I originally planned to limit the number of bonds issued," Aegor explained, his voice brimming with excitement. "If there's no real way to make money, the faster the fund grows, the quicker it collapses. Now that we have a project that can generate revenue, limiting the bonds is pointless." He leaned forward eagerly. "We already know what to do with the first round of funds. First, we'll recruit people with seal engraving skills. Not the master craftsmen from the King's Landing seal shop, they're too expensive, but apprentices or anyone with some experience will do. Next, we'll contact paper merchants. We need a large, stable supply of cheap paper. We finally have something solid to work toward." Tyrion smirked and folded his arms. "Huh, you were planning to limit the number of bonds. Are you seriously confident enough that people will beg to lend you money? If things go as planned, I might even raise the interest rate. By then, people will line up from the Red Keep all the way to the Gate of the Gods to throw their money at me," Aegor said, half boasting but fully confident. He stood and stretched. "That's enough for today. Get a good rest tonight." Tomorrow we'll split up to handle our respective tasks. In countless tales of world travelers, the protagonist always seems to effortlessly dig out their first pot of gold using knowledge from their previous world. But when it came to Aegor's turn, he realized how difficult it was to turn knowledge into money. He knew how combustion engines worked, how generators produced electricity through magnetism, and even how airplanes and spacecraft soared into the skies. But these advanced technologies were utterly useless in this medieval world. Knowing the principles was one thing, but building these machines was another. Impossible, given Westeros' materials and industrial capabilities. Even something as small as a screw for an airplane was beyond what this world could produce. Who would have thought that, just as he was feeling stuck, a casual conversation with Tyrion would reveal a golden business opportunity? The sheer backwardness of this world exceeded his expectations. To make money here, he didn't need the cutting-edge knowledge he'd imagined. Technologies and items that were commonplace or even obsolete back in his world were revolutionary innovations here. The sun rose, heralding a new day. As usual, Yoren, the recruiter for the Night's Watch, went to Flea Bottom after breakfast to round up new recruits. Tyrion, in an unusual display of early rising, left to begin setting up the printing factory he had been dreaming of. Only Aegor remained behind, sleeping a little longer. When the sun was fully up and the time seemed right, he mounted his horse and set off leisurely for the storefront Eddard Stark had arranged for the Night's Watch in a street-facing location. It was, of course, impossible to have seals and signs made overnight, and the bonds wouldn't be issued in just a day or two. But the Night Watchman's office had to open quickly. Whether for signing bonds or recruiting new members, such activities couldn't be conducted in the open air or in someone else's home. Just as conmen and shell companies rent office spaces and hire employees to establish an air of legitimacy, financial dealings need to be conducted in a fixed, professional-looking location. This would provide first-time visitors with a sense of security. Jack had already ordered tables, chairs, cabinets, and other office supplies the previous day and scheduled their delivery. They were due to arrive today, and as the applicant and future head of the Night Watchman's office, Aegor had no choice but to be on site to supervise the setup and oversee the arrangement of the storefront. The merchant proved to have a good sense of timing. Within half an hour of opening, all the workers and goods arrived. After a quick cleanup, Aegor began directing the workers to move tables, chairs, and cabinets inside, arranging them one by one in their designated places. Though he'd never opened a shop before, growing up around his mother's tailoring and clothing store had left an indelible influence on him, without even realizing it. He set up the office's layout in a way reminiscent of his childhood home. The office was divided into two rooms, one for public access and the other for private use. On one wall of the public room, a poster would display detailed explanations and rules of the Night's Watch bonds. On another wall, a poster would highlight the benefits and requirements of enlisting in the Night's Watch. Below these posters, 2 rows of benches were set up for visitors to rest. In the center of the room stood a large table, where the store manager would eventually sit to explain bond purchases or enlistment procedures to interested visitors. Once they were certain of their interest, they would be invited into the inner room. The inner room served as Aegor's private office. It featured a row of simple cabinets and wooden shelves with space for safes or other secure storage in the future. A desk stood by the window, slightly smaller than the one in the outer room. This would be the place for more in-depth discussions and negotiations, where Aegor would personally sign every Night's Watch bond and recruitment contract. After the setup was complete, both Aegor and Jack were drenched in sweat. They moved chairs outside the storefront, sitting down to catch their breath while looking at the newly furnished but still empty office. "Do you really think anyone will sign up for the Night's Watch?" Jack asked, fanning himself with one hand. He had removed his Lannister armor due to the heat. "I mean, no offense, but the price you pay for wearing black, it's just too steep. I'd rather die." "True," Aegor replied, a slight smile on his face. "The Night's Watch does need to reform. If we keep clinging to that sacred nonsense about lifelong vows, we'll disappear altogether." "Reform, yes, reform." Aegor's smile deepened, though it was a calculated one. He had no intention of actually sending large numbers of new recruits to the wall. Even if he had the means to do so, he wouldn't. Training them, making them swear oaths, and turning them into lifelong brothers of the Night's Watch offered him no personal benefit. It was true that the more men he sent to the wall, the more secure its defenses would be, and the less likely it was that the Watch would recall him. But it was also true that with more recruits, the overall power of the Night's Watch would grow, and that growth would diminish his influence. Aegor had no desire to return to the wall, but neither did he want to be sidelined by others in the Watch. His plan was simple: spend a month or two pretending to recruit in King's Landing, then write a letter to the Night's Watch leaders lamenting his difficulties. He would claim he'd tried his best to persuade many to join, but nearly all balked when they learned of the lifelong vows. He would propose a compromise: allow men to temporarily serve at the wall for a few years, help defend it during these dangerous times, and then return home. With the wall in desperate need of manpower, Jeor Mormont would have little choice but to agree. From there, Aegor could recruit mercenaries or adventurers, paying them wages to fulfill their service. These men would owe their positions, their pay, and even their eventual freedom to him, forming a network of loyalty. Over time, this temporary force would grow into a significant faction within the Night's Watch. Imagine a scenario where half or even more of the Watch owed their allegiance to him. His influence would be unparalleled. Even if he held no formal position, he could become the de facto leader of the Night's Watch. He wouldn't rebel or seek independence, avoiding attention from larger powers, but anyone, whether allies or Thorne or Benjen Stark, who tried to move against him would have to think twice. What to name this new force? The Night's Watch Auxiliary Corps, the Wall Defense Construction Corps, or the temporary garrison of the Wall of Despair? That could be decided later. For now, there was no need to share such thoughts with Jack. It wasn't a matter of looking down on Tyrion's squire. Some things were simply better kept to oneself. Everything depended on the success of the Night's Watch bonds. As long as that succeeded, all his plans would follow. After all, problems that can be solved with money aren't real problems. Aegor's confident expression, as if he had everything under control, made Jack uneasy. After following Tyrion for so long, the squire had absorbed some of his master's insatiable curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Just as Jack was about to ask more, he glanced up and froze. Seven hells, Lord Stark, why is he here, Aegor? He seems to be heading this way. Is he looking for you? Aegor, startled by the interruption, followed Jack's gaze. Sure enough, the current hand of the king, Eddard Stark, was riding along the street with a group of guards. The Night's Watch office had only just begun its renovations, far from ready to host visitors, let alone the hand of the Seven Kingdoms. Still, Eddard Stark's presence couldn't be entirely coincidental. Given his concern for the Night's Watch, it wasn't unreasonable to think he might stop by to inspect or even instruct the progress of their work. Technically, the Night's Watch was independent, and the Warden of the North had no authority over its operations. But practically speaking, Stark's support, or at least his lack of interference, was critical for Aegor to carry out his plans in King's Landing. It wasn't long before Eddard Stark's sharp gaze fell on Aegor, standing conspicuously in black. Stark said something to his guards, who lightly pulled their reins and steered closer. Within moments, the group stopped at the door of the half-finished office. Lord Stark. Aegor greeted him with calm composure, neither overly deferential nor insolent. At that moment, he fully embodied the role of a diligent and loyal Night's Watch officer. For this reason alone, Eddard would have no cause to make things difficult for him. Yeah. Eddard nodded briefly in greeting, remaining seated on his horse. His sharp eyes scanned the Night's Watch office, which was still under construction. A faint smile of interest crossed his face. It looks quite formal. When do you expect to start recruiting? In 2 or 3 days, I'll begin as soon as possible, Aegor replied. This office won't just handle recruitment. It'll also serve as a hub for receiving, accounting, and transferring the food, equipment, and funds donated by the nobles and common folk of the Seven Kingdoms to the Night's Watch. Everything will be recorded and sent to the Wall. Eddard hesitated, his gaze briefly narrowing. Where did you get the money for all this? Lord Tyrion Lannister provided me with a squire to assist, Aegor answered without missing a beat, gesturing toward Jack. This is Jack. Realizing he couldn't avoid the introduction, the young squire quickly stood and greeted the hand of the king. Unlike Aegor's calm demeanor, Jack was visibly nervous. It wasn't surprising, given the well-known animosity between the Stark and Lannister families. Eddard had initially wondered why there was someone here in red robes, but now that his confusion was resolved, he saw no reason to show any disrespect to a servant. He gave Jack a curt nod in acknowledgement of his greeting before turning to a short man standing nearby. The wildlings beyond the Wall are restless and the Night's Watch is struggling, Eddard said gravely. Even with the treasury short on funds, symbolic support must be provided. Go raise some money to allocate to the Night's Watch. Consider it part of our national defense expenditures. Me, sir? The short man looked taken aback, his expression innocent. The kingdom's finances are— There's no room for debate, Eddard interrupted firmly. This is a matter of defending the realm. You managed to find prize money for the tourney, you can handle this. Isn't that your job as master of coin? His tone left no room for argument. I'm not asking for much, just a few dozen or 100 gold dragons will do, enough to help the Night's Watch establish itself here. The rest is up to his ability. Well, if it's the hand of the king's order, the man sighed dramatically, his tone dripping with reluctance. I suppose I'll just have to make it work. Eddard ignored the man's theatrics and turned to one of his guards. Jory, you stay here with Arya. Lord Baelish and I have other matters to attend to. Yes, my lord. What? A girl's voice rang out in protest. You promised to take me shopping and now you're leaving. I'm coming with you. The protest drew Aegor's attention, and for the first time he noticed the girl among the group. Without needing much thought, he recognized her as Arya Stark, the second daughter of Eddard Stark. As for the short man Eddard had ordered to raise funds, Aegor realized with a jolt that this must be Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger himself. The master manipulator who thrived on chaos. It took Aegor a moment to fully register this revelation. Littlefinger's appearance was somewhat different from the TV series portrayal, which was likely why Aegor hadn't recognized him immediately, but now that he knew, he couldn't help but take a longer look. First, he understood why Baelish had earned the nickname Littlefinger. Then, like a cold bucket of water poured over his head, he remembered that the events of the original story were still unfolding, moving forward like an unstoppable wheel rolling downhill. The place the hand of the king and I are heading isn't suitable for children, Baelish said with a sly smile, giving Arya an exaggerated wink. Especially not for girls. I'm not a child, Arya snapped. Be patient, Arya, Eddard said gently, trying to placate her. I'll come back later and we'll continue shopping. And Aegor, he turned toward the Night's Watchman, his voice calm but weighted with meaning. Do your best and stay out of trouble. With that, Eddard gave a brief smile, then gestured for Baelish and the guards to follow him. The group rode away, leaving the Night's Watch office behind. The big boss was busy, and as quickly as he came he left. Eddard Stark's group disappeared down the street almost immediately. Arya was left fuming at her father's inconsistency, loudly complaining about his broken promise to take her shopping. Meanwhile, Jory, the captain of Stark's guards, tried his best to soothe her frustration. Aegor, however, was quiet. He stared in the direction Eddard had gone, lost in thought. By telling him to stay out of trouble, was Eddard hinting that he should keep quiet about Joffrey's supposed assassination of Bran? And what about the order to Littlefinger to raise funds for the Night's Watch? Was that Stark's way of throwing him hush money? No, those concerns were secondary. With Eddard's honorable nature, there was little risk of him harming Aegor, even if he suspected or knew that the assassination attempt on Bran was fabricated. The real question was, what was Littlefinger up to now? Piecing together the conversation he'd overheard, Aegor tried to reconstruct the events. Arya, restless and bored, had likely badgered her father into taking her out for some entertainment. Unable to say no, Eddard had agreed. But then they ran into Littlefinger, who came bearing some urgent business. Whatever the reason, Eddard had decided to accompany him instead, leaving his daughter behind. In the original story, Eddard didn't take Arya shopping at all, but this time the story had diverged. Without the Starks blaming the Lannisters for Bran's fall and alleged assassination attempt, Catelyn hadn't secretly traveled to King's Landing.
Author's note: in this chapter, the clash of old magic and new ambition takes center stage. Knowledge, strategy, and fire mingle as Westeros confronts both supernatural and financial storms. Even in a world of dragons and White Walkers, the mind can be the sharpest weapon.
Tyrion hadn't been kidnapped, so there was no conflict between the lion and the wolf. As a result, Jaime hadn't challenged Eddard to a duel, and the 50 Stark guards were still alive and well. Eddard may have argued with Robert over the plan to assassinate Daenerys Targaryen, but it hadn't damaged their friendship. He was still firmly in his role as Hand of the King. In this relatively peaceful environment, it made sense that Eddard, as a father, would take time to indulge his restless daughter. But for him to suddenly change plans and follow Littlefinger meant the matter was serious. What could be so important? They seemed to be heading in the direction of the inn we're staying at, Jack muttered, breaking Aegor's train of thought. The mention of the inn reminded Aegor of something. Littlefinger's earlier comment to Arya, that the place wasn't suitable for children, especially girls, suddenly clicked. He recalled Tyrion's insistence on staying at the Albatross Inn when they arrived in King's Landing. The Red Keep is too far from my favorite brothel, Tyrion had said. It only took Aegor a few seconds to reach a conclusion. They're going to Silk Street. Silk Street, Jack repeated, his tone hesitant. As Tyrion's squire, he was well aware of what went on there. He'd even accompanied Tyrion on some escapades, but he couldn't reconcile the idea of Eddard Stark, of all people, visiting such a place. But Lord Stark doesn't seem like someone who would go to a brothel. Going to a brothel doesn't necessarily mean going for that. Aegor's pupils dilated as more details from the original plot flooded back into his mind. He suddenly understood exactly what was happening. Littlefinger's ultimate goal was to sow chaos in the Seven Kingdoms and profit from the turmoil. As a master manipulator, he could exploit any situation, no matter how minor or coincidental, to further his ambitions. Whether or not Catelyn had come to King's Landing was irrelevant. Littlefinger would find a way to insert himself into the Starks' affairs regardless. Without Catelyn's misguided assurances of Littlefinger's trustworthiness, Eddard would naturally be more wary of him. But for a manipulator of Littlefinger's caliber, even the slightest opening was enough. Now the cunning schemer was leading Eddard Stark to Silk Street, ostensibly to investigate the death of Jon Arryn. But in truth, Littlefinger was setting Eddard up to discover the true parentage of Cersei's children. This revelation would be a death sentence for Eddard. His honorable nature would compel him to act, ultimately leading to Robert's death, his own execution, and the explosion of civil war. Renly would flee King's Landing to rally support for his claim to the throne. Stannis would assert his legitimate rights. Robb Stark, still little more than a boy, would be thrust into the role of king in the north, naively freeing Theon Greyjoy in the process. The War of the Five Kings would begin. Aegor felt a chill as he realized the implications. His confidence in the success of the Night's Watch bonds had always rested on two pillars: Tyrion's involvement and the universal nature of human greed. But war was the ultimate destroyer of trust. In a time of chaos and uncertainty, no one would dare risk their money, no matter how high the promised returns. In King's Landing, Aegor could avoid or navigate threats from individuals like Robert, Joffrey, or even Cersei. But chaos and war, there was no escaping that. For his plans to succeed, peace was essential, and someone like Littlefinger, who thrived on chaos, was an obstacle he couldn't ignore. Their interests were fundamentally at odds. Littlefinger's plans had to be stopped. The noisy chatter outside brought Aegor back to reality. Now wasn't the time to get lost in thought. He handed his horse's reins to the captain of Eddard Stark's guards and gestured for them to enter the partially set-up Night's Watch office. The two guests, one a stern soldier, the other the spirited Arya Stark, sat down. Aegor followed them inside, all the while continuing to plan in secret. For the sake of his deception, he might now have to position himself as a peacekeeper, which struck him as ironic. There was no room for laughter. This was a serious and messy problem. Stopping the War of the Five Kings, just thinking about it gave him flashbacks to his failed attempt to stop Bran from falling. Was this war another machination of some divine entity? Wait, this line of thinking led nowhere. Forget those meddlesome gods. The best solution to stop the chaos logically would be to eliminate Littlefinger and Varys, these two master manipulators, in one fell swoop, but he couldn't do it himself. The idea of relying on outside help naturally brought him to Jaqen H'ghar, but even that led to a dead end. The wounds from his encounter with Melisandre were still healing, and his thoughts about the faceless man only deepened his headache. He hadn't forgotten Jaqen, he simply didn't know how to approach him. Jaqen H'ghar was from Braavos, a city unique in more ways than one. Braavos wasn't just known for the Iron Bank. It was a haven of multiculturalism, a city-state founded by former slaves who had permanently abolished slavery. Its trade networks were unmatched, its religious and cultural diversity widely respected. The Iron Bank wielded immense financial and political influence, and then there was the House of Black and White, home to the legendary Faceless Men, assassins renowned for their lethal precision. Overseeing it all was the Sea Lord, a ruler chosen through an enigmatic and intricate selection process. Braavos had never lost a war, even against powerful opponents like Pentos. Such consistent victories were no accident. Winning at that scale required unparalleled coordination between its institutions, the Sea Lord, the Iron Bank, and likely even the Faceless Men. These groups were likely interconnected, perhaps even operated by the same elite ruling class. It wasn't far-fetched to imagine the House of Black and White doubling as an intelligence agency, training spies and assassins to eliminate threats to Braavos' interests. Jaqen H'ghar was no ordinary killer. He was a high-level faceless man capable of training apprentices, a spy and an agent of a city-state known for its far-reaching influence. Why would such a man allow himself to end up imprisoned in King's Landing? Was it a mistake, or was he there on purpose, perhaps with a mission to kill someone in Westeros or gather information? Aegor had nothing solid to work with. Creating an accident to rescue Jaqen and earn his favor had briefly crossed his mind. But without reliable allies or a team he could trust, it was impossible to execute such a plan. Violent solutions like killing were off the table. That left only one viable option: stabilize the situation in King's Landing and help Eddard Stark gain the upper hand, or at least avoid a catastrophic defeat. But going head-to-head with Littlefinger, Aegor didn't think he had the skill for that. On top of that, Littlefinger had a temporary ally in Varys, another schemer eager to sow chaos, albeit for different reasons. Aegor's foreknowledge of the plot seemed almost useless in the face of these two high-level players. While they thrived on manipulation and intelligence gathering, he was juggling multiple responsibilities and struggling just to maintain his footing. The bonds, the Night's Watch office, the chaos in King's Landing, it all threatened to overwhelm him. One mistake could expose him and get him killed. Besides, what he knew was only the original plot before the divergence. He thought back to his failure to stop Bran's fall. That experience had taught him that direct interference in the plot could easily backfire. How had he managed to escape the mess in Winterfell? By secretly informing the Stark family. Past successful experiences suddenly gave Aegor an epiphany. Just as he had avoided directly dealing with the assassin to clear himself of any connection with Bran's attempted murder, if he wanted to help Eddard, there was no need to confront Littlefinger directly. Eddard Stark, as the de facto ruler of the North, had his own resources and intelligence. All Aegor needed to do was to sow discord between Eddard and Littlefinger, preventing the former from being led by the nose. That alone would suffice. "Aegor, my lady is talking to you." A male voice abruptly interrupted Aegor's train of thought. He looked up and found himself face to face with a young girl's stern, expectant expression. "Ah, sorry, I was just thinking about recruitment. What can I do for you, Miss Arya? Are you the Aegor that Jon talked about?" Arya pouted, repeating her earlier question. "The Night's Watch Ranger who killed the White Walker? Yes." Aegor reluctantly admitted it, noticing the incredulous look on Jory Castle, the captain of Eddard Stark's guards. It felt strange, even guilt-inducing, to tell the truth for once. "Are White Walkers really that strong? They're terrifying. Gary and I fought 1-2 against one and we still almost got killed. But you managed to kill it in the end. You must be very good with a sword." Arya's eyes sparkled with admiration. "Come here, I want to talk to you alone. Don't follow us." She yelled at Jory and the other guards, then promptly grabbed the still confused Aegor by the arm and dragged him into the unfinished chief logistics officer's office. After closing the door behind them, Arya leaned in with a conspiratorial air and asked, "Can you teach me how to use a sword?" "Huh," Aegor blinked, taken aback. Shouldn't Eddard have already hired her a swordsmanship instructor by now? Wasn't it supposed to be that Bravosi water dancer Syrio Forel? "Why not ask your father to hire a teacher for you? How could he agree to that? Are you stupid? I'm a girl." Something felt off. What change in the storyline had led to this deviation? Aegor strongly suspected it was because of his own meddling. The butterfly effect. A small disturbance in initial conditions could lead to a massive chain reaction over time. Maybe it was his fabricated accusation against Joffrey that shifted Eddard's priorities, or perhaps Arya had hidden her needle from her father too carefully this time. Whatever the reason, it wasn't worth worrying about now. Right now he had enough on his plate. He couldn't be distracted by Eddard Stark's spirited little girl. "I'm sorry, young lady, but I'm busy," Aegor said firmly, though inwardly he thought, "I'm busy trying to save your father's life." He shook his head politely. "Why don't you ask your father's guards? My father just helped you a lot and you won't even do me this one small favor." "Your father helped me, not you," Aegor thought bitterly. Arya was undoubtedly a key character in the grand scheme of things. If circumstances allowed, she could be considered a potential ally. But right now, her worth to him was close to zero, at least until she completed her training with the Faceless Men. It was utilitarian, no doubt, to measure someone's value solely by their usefulness. But Aegor was in a precarious position. He couldn't afford to indulge in sentimentality. He shook his head again, this time more decisively, preparing to decline her request outright. Under Arya's fiery glare, he began formulating the words of rejection in his mind. Yet, at the last moment, a sudden idea struck him. To be fair, Arya is a lively, adorable, and lovable child just like her brother Bran. She's not as skilled at dressing up as her sister Sansa, so she often gives off the impression of being plain-looking. However, from a modern perspective, judging by her facial features and bone structure, this little girl is actually quite the beauty. Apparently, someone agreed with this judgment. If Aegor remembered correctly, someone in the original story remarked that Arya resembled her Aunt Lyanna and shared the same wolf blood as her. The wolf blood represents a relentless pursuit of freedom, a dangerously intoxicating romance, and an untamable wildness. Only through spontaneous journeys, reckless love, endless adventures, and the thrill of the unknown can those who carry this blood find fulfillment. And what did Arya's Aunt Lyanna do to make her name in history? She eloped with Prince Rhaegar, who already had a wife and children, while she herself was betrothed to Robert Baratheon. Sure, the marriages between Lyanna Stark and Robert Baratheon and between Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell were arranged for political gain, not personal happiness. Perhaps Lyanna and Rhaegar met during the Harrenhal tournament, believed they'd found true love, and then made the foolish decision to act on it. From a modern perspective, Aegor might reluctantly support their choice for the sake of following their hearts, but running away without leaving a word, that was a whole other level of stupidity. Even a 6-year-old knows to tell their parents where they're going before heading out to play. A teenage girl not understanding this basic principle, if something happened, who could she blame but herself? Lyanna, the daughter of House Stark, eloped with the crown prince of House Targaryen and became his lover. What followed was a scandal that rocked the North, the Stormlands, and the royal family itself. At worst, it might have cancelled the Starks' betrothal to the Baratheons, tarnished Rhaegar's reputation, and required a hefty price to clean up the mess he caused. But because of Lyanna's foolishness and ignorance, a disaster was set in motion. Her father and brother assumed she'd been kidnapped and stormed into King's Landing to demand her return. They spoke out of turn to the Mad King, who in his paranoia and cruelty had them burned alive. Then Jon Arryn, the Warden of the Vale, refused to hand over his wards, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon, prompting the rebellion known as Robert's Rebellion. In the end, the two star-crossed lovers paid the ultimate price. Rhaegar died in battle, his dynasty was destroyed, and Lyanna herself succumbed to childbirth. All that remained was her beauty, immortalized in a cold statue. Her reckless actions were no different from Robb Stark's later betrayal of a marriage pact, which ultimately led to the infamous Red Wedding. This is the world of ice and fire. If you court disaster, you'll meet it. Of course, while both the Stark children and Joffrey, Cersei's spoiled son, were willful, there were important differences. To put it simply, the Stark children still had redeeming qualities. They understood basic manners and had virtues like kindness, integrity, and loyalty. If the world weren't about to plunge into chaos, Aegor wouldn't have minded making friends or forming partnerships with them. But right now, what he needed were allies with wealth and power and partners with cunning and foresight. The Starks, prone to getting their friends and families into trouble, were far from his first choice. Besides, Arya was only 10 years old. Unless Aegor had some unsavory inclinations, which he didn't, why would he take an interest in her? His initial thought was simple: keep a safe distance from the Starks, who seemed cursed to bring misfortune to those around them. If he stayed out of their way, they wouldn't drag him down when calamity struck. His swordsmanship wasn't bad, perhaps good enough to teach Arya a thing or two. But if he stepped into the role of the Braavosi sword master and followed the original plot to its tragic conclusion, he'd be courting disaster himself. But upon further thought, even if this little she-wolf had no remarkable abilities for the time being, her status as a Stark child was intimidating enough. Arya could trick Eddard into giving her a certificate, which would usually be convincing enough. And if clients frequently saw a girl from the Stark family coming and going from the Night's Watch office, wouldn't they have more confidence in the bonds they held? Additionally, though Aegor had not yet devised the best way to create a rift between Littlefinger and Eddard, he realized that whatever plan he chose, winning over a Stark child would make things much easier. After a brief internal struggle, Aegor reluctantly stroked his chin and said, "It's not completely impossible, but there are conditions. If you want me to teach you how to use a sword, then I am your master and you'll have to listen to me." "Okay, master, I'll listen to you." Aegor continued to deliberate. Suddenly, he remembered that in the original events, the faceless man he'd never managed to recruit seemed to have some connection to the girl standing before him. There was an old saying that people naturally gravitate toward each other, just like Aegor and Tyrion. Even if Aegor hadn't gone out of his way to get close to Tyrion in Winterfell, given the right opportunity to meet and collaborate again, they would still likely hit it off. Could the same principle apply to Arya and Jaqen Hkar, both young and old? After some thought, Aegor dismissed the notion of recruiting Jaqen through Arya as pure wishful thinking. He ultimately decided to let things play out naturally and see what would happen if he put the two of them in the same place. "Here's my first condition: don't come to me dressed like a boy anymore. Learn from your sister, dress like a proper girl, and then come for your sword lessons." Why? Because dressing and fighting like a boy isn't exactly unique or remarkable, is it? But if you can be a proper lady and a skilled swordsman like a rose with thorns, that would be a challenge, wouldn't it? The reasoning was mostly nonsense. Truthfully, Aegor just didn't want to teach a tomboy in his precious free time. He was already drowning in work. And having to deal with Arya in boy's clothing would only add to the monotony. That makes sense. Arya pondered his words and was unexpectedly drawn to the idea of being a rose with thorns. She nodded. "Then I'll come here starting tomorrow. It's up to you. If nothing unexpected happens, I'll be staying here for a while," Aegor replied with a shrug. "Second condition: before you leave for your lessons, make sure you inform your father or his guards and have someone escort you. Even though the Red Keep isn't far from here, it may not be entirely safe for someone like you. I'm not a child anymore. If you say you're not, then you're not," Aegor said dismissively. "But do as I say. If you want me to teach you how to use a sword, don't cause me unnecessary trouble." After accepting this unexpected female apprentice, Aegor rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. His responsibilities had increased yet again, and he was utterly exhausted. Coming from a peaceful and prosperous modern world, his childhood diet's nutritional quality was on par with what nobles in this world enjoyed. His naturally excellent physical condition, coupled with some training, made him stronger and more agile than many veterans stationed at the wall. But that was the limit. Among the craftsmen and officers of the Night's Watch, the weak and disabled and the average wildlings beyond the wall, he might be considered the backbone of the Rangers. However, compared to the rest of Westeros, he was merely a recruit with slightly better discipline and experience. The brief time he spent training, less than a year, alongside the limited skill level of his master, Alliser Thorne, could not make up for the gulf in ability, no matter how clever or resourceful he might be as a time traveler. Forget about competing with those legendary figures. Even Jory Castle, Eddard Stark's captain of the guard, left behind in Winterfell to watch over Arya, was someone he couldn't hope to surpass. Luckily, Arya was still just an innocent little girl. If he put in half the effort he used to gain Tyrion's trust, he was confident he could figure out how to handle her properly. He could feign teaching her basic sword grips, footwork, and fundamental moves like slashing and blocking. By the time she realized he wasn't the master swordsman she thought him to be, she would already trust him, perhaps even see him as a dependable friend, another Jon Snow in her eyes. And if she wanted to continue her training afterward, he could always find someone better suited for the task. Someone like Jaqen Hkar or the famous Braavosi swordsman of the Sea Lord's court. What was his name again? Syrio Forel, or was it Leofor? Never mind. After agreeing to teach Arya some swordsmanship, the two left the small inner room. There was little of interest in the sparse Night's Watch office, which held nothing but some tables, chairs, and cabinets. Arya quickly became restless, her curious eyes darting around. Thankfully, Eddard returned soon with his original entourage and took his daughter away. Judging by the pensive look on the hand of the king's face, Littlefinger had clearly enlightened him on something. If this schemer were allowed to continue unchecked, Eddard's trust in him would deepen bit by bit, and by then it would be too late. The plan to sow discord between Littlefinger and Eddard needed to be put into action immediately. This took precedence over everything else. With most of the day's work completed, Aegor handed Jack a dozen silver stags and instructed him to purchase a few lightweight practice swords. After that, he prepared to close up the office and return to the inn to strategize on how to drive a wedge between Littlefinger and Eddard. Aegor, Tyrion arrived at the office in a rush, accompanied by Morris. He dismounted hastily and stepped inside. "I was just about to head back. What's so urgent?" Aegor asked, his brow furrowed. The dwarf waved his hand, panting slightly. "Come inside, let's talk in private." Although puzzled, Aegor followed Tyrion back into the inner room where he had spoken with Arya earlier. Sitting down, he waited for Tyrion to explain. After hearing Tyrion's explanation, Aegor finally understood why the dwarf had come rushing over. The paper merchant they had contacted earlier couldn't provide the stable, cheap, and large quantities of paper they needed. The reason? Papermaking didn't exist in this world. Every book in Westeros was hand-copied onto parchment, which was made from actual sheepskin. This made books extraordinarily expensive, with the majority of the cost attributed to the materials rather than the scribe's labor, as Aegor and Tyrion had initially assumed. The realization hit them like a cold splash of water. Without affordable paper, they couldn't achieve a revolutionary breakthrough in publishing or generate the massive profits needed to sustain their Ponzi scheme. To be honest, I only discovered this today, Tyrion admitted apologetically. As a nobleman, whenever he needed paper, he would simply toss a gold coin to Morris or Jack to purchase a stack, considering any extra costs as a tip. Whether a piece of paper cost 1 or 2 silver stags had never been of concern to him. But now that he had serious plans to start a large-scale enterprise, he realized just how insufficient his funds were. The pocket money that had seemed plentiful before suddenly felt like a pittance, and as for Lord Tywin, the fact that his father hadn't docked his allowance entirely was already a sign of generosity. Asking Tywin Lannister for a loan to cause trouble, out of the question. The excitement of preparing to open a factory and print books to spread knowledge had been crushed by the sobering reality. They didn't even have enough money to buy the materials. That doesn't make sense, Aegor frowned, puzzled. The technological level of Westeros resembled the late European Middle Ages. By that time, the knowledge of papermaking should have been widespread. Wait, spread. This world lacked a civilization as advanced as those on Earth, and no one had discovered or developed the art of papermaking. Without innovators to invent it or intermediaries to spread the knowledge, the technique simply didn't exist in this realm. Though the explanation made sense, Aegor still found it frustrating. Papermaking wasn't some cutting-edge technology. Couldn't the people of this world have invented it on their own? True, the irregular seasons and the resulting lack of stability likely stifled innovation. But still, Aegor, Tyrion interrupted his thoughts, isn't your homeland technologically advanced? How does your homeland produce paper? I'm just an adventurer, not an expert. Papermaking has been a standard process for thousands of years where I come from. Such a basic technology that it's hard to believe there's a place in the world without it. Aegor scratched his head, frustrated. The so-called prosperity of King's Landing with its bustling shops and workshops now seemed like an illusion of progress. Did this mean he'd have to figure out how to introduce papermaking to this world? Unfortunately, his knowledge of the process was limited to vague concepts. He couldn't suddenly turn into Kai Lun in a foreign land. The paper merchant mentioned a young man outside the city experimenting with making paper from grass. But apparently what he's managed to create is only good enough to wipe yourself with, Tyrion chuckled dryly. I'll make time to visit him and see what he's doing. Grass for paper? Aegor's mind raced. Although he didn't know the specifics of papermaking, he was aware that modern paper was made from plant fibers treated chemically. Perhaps he lacked the ability to succeed on his own, but with proper direction and funding it could be done. That's promising news, Aegor said, his spirits lifting. Take your men tomorrow and find this young man. If his method is just drying broad leaves and calling it paper, then it's worthless. But if he's attempting to crush the grass and process it into something usable, bring him in. Offer him whatever resources he needs, tens or even hundreds of gold dragons if necessary, and have him refine the process. Help him identify the best materials to use. We'll make this work. Crushing grass to make paper? Tyrion looked skeptical but didn't argue. Over the past few months he had come to trust Aegor's judgment almost unconditionally. All right, I'll see to it. If everything works out, this could be a game changer. Printing alone might reduce book costs by a small margin, but if we control the entire production chain from papermaking to printing, the profits could be astronomical. Exactly. In my homeland we call that a complete industrial chain, Aegor explained, emphasizing the importance of monopolizing the process. If this young man's methods have potential, bring him under our wing. Have him sign a confidentiality agreement, and make sure the secrets of the trade stay with us. Complete industrial chain. I like that term, Tyrion said, his grin returning. The bleak mood from earlier had lifted, replaced by excitement. While discussing the details of establishing a book printing industry chain, Aegor and Tyrion returned to the inn together. As they entered, the innkeeper informed Aegor that a young man had come looking for him earlier in the afternoon, asking for money. It should be the son of the mine owner you introduced to me, Aegor mused after thinking for a moment. He hadn't borrowed any money yet, so the only person who might come to him about funds was likely that young man. It's probably because the mine is ready to start operations and needs funding. So many things are piling up that I almost forgot about it. Have Jack send some money over tomorrow, Tyrion said without hesitation. Alas. For the first time I've realized even I don't have enough money. The sign will take 2 days to arrive, but you can pick up the seal tomorrow, Aegor replied. Let's secure the first loan as soon as possible. That's all we can do for now. I suppose I'll have to start scheming against my own people. Now let me think, where should I begin? The two climbed the stairs as they talked. Everyone had been busy all day, so after they ate dinner together, they each retired to their rooms for the night. Tyrion might actually have gone to bed, but Aegor was far from comfortable. To the imp, this was just another intriguing game, a diversion to occupy his sharp mind. For someone like Tyrion, born into the wealthy and powerful Lannister family, the accumulated fortunes of one generation became the safety net for the next, granting him the freedom to take risks and make mistakes. Aegor, on the other hand, didn't have that luxury. His parents weren't even part of this world. This elaborate ruse, he was caught up in, determined his very survival here. He had to put everything he had on the line. Anyone who threatened his interests was an enemy. He paced the room, racking his brain for a way to prevent Littlefinger from gaining Eddard's trust. Hour after hour passed as one idea after another was discarded. If it were a simple matter of sowing discord, anyone could do it. But this time, his opponent was one of the most cunning players in the Game of Thrones. Either you killed him outright, or you stayed hidden and avoided alerting him to your plans, because if Petter Baelish discovered your intent, even a single misstep could cost you your life. The most direct and brutal option would be to tell Eddard outright that Littlefinger had orchestrated Jon Arryn's murder. But this case was different from the time he framed Joffrey. It wasn't common knowledge. Petter had manipulated Lysa Tully into poisoning her husband, and the truth was known only to those directly involved. There was no way Aegor could plausibly overhear such secretive information. Besides, you couldn't use the same trick repeatedly. If a member of the Night's Watch kept uncovering top-secret matters, wouldn't Eddard grow suspicious? Aegor wanted to play the role of an upright and loyal Night's Watch soldier, not some omniscient puppet master weaving webs of intrigue. Perhaps he could revisit the anonymous letter plan he had considered during the Winterfell incident, the one he ultimately scrapped. An anonymous letter accusing Littlefinger might work, but how would it reach Eddard without being intercepted in a city as full of spies as King's Landing? Any slip-up could be fatal. Littlefinger might not have true confidants or allies, but he did have money and plenty of connections. Meanwhile, Aegor had nothing, no resources, no network, no protection. If he were exposed, a cup of poisoned wine, a hidden blade, or a silent arrow would erase him from existence. Sending a message through Arya wasn't safe either. The girl might be innocent and unlikely to betray her teacher on purpose, but in front of her beloved father an unintentional slip of the tongue could easily reveal his involvement. The streets outside the window were quiet. Although King's Landing didn't have a curfew, there were no night markets except during major festivals. Aegor sighed, blew out the candle, and lay on the bed. Perhaps like last time in Winterfell, inspiration would strike the moment he woke up. Maybe he had been thinking about Littlefinger for too long because as he drifted off, that familiar motto echoed in his mind. Chaos is a ladder. Chaos is a ladder. This sentence actually made a lot of sense. In a world where social classes were nearly immovable, the best way for those at the bottom to rise to the top was to create chaos. Chaos disrupted the interests of those in power, and when the mighty fell, someone else was bound to benefit. The problem, however, was that chaos tended to benefit people randomly, often in ways that defied expectations. Littlefinger's true genius lay in his ability to precisely position himself at the places where the great lords were injured and bleeding, ensuring he reaped the greatest rewards from the chaos. In this respect, he even outshone Varys, another master strategist known for his long-term planning. Using the stock market as a metaphor, Aegor thought Varys and Littlefinger might both invest in a stock with a general upward trend. Varys would hold onto it for the long term, earning steady profits. Littlefinger, on the other hand, would use meticulous micromanipulation to buy low and sell high repeatedly, making far greater gains than the stock's overall increase. This kind of talent left Aegor both marveling at and admiring Petter Baelish's ingenuity. But Petter was far from flawless. In the original plot, he vividly demonstrated the limitations of a pure pragmatist. He had used the intricacies of court politics to toy with almost everyone, but his ambition lacked a solid foundation. Aside from his relentless hunger for power, he showed no broader political ideals. This was fine in the beginning stages of his rise, but even toward the end of the game he never bothered to fabricate a vision or ideology to attract followers or consolidate the power he had seized. How could he expect to sit on the Iron Throne? Littlefinger was undoubtedly formidable. Players with sharp minds and no moral boundaries could often rise quickly from chaos and emerge as winners. But that was his limit. He was the most dangerous destroyer, but never the final victor. The best he could hope for was to help some other force rise to power and profit from their success. Yet blinded by ambition, he wanted the throne for himself. That impossible goal eventually led to his downfall. In the end, Littlefinger's power was entirely self-contained. It began and ended with him. Even at his peak, anyone with a blade could end his life, and no one would mourn him, much less rise to avenge him. If Aegor simply wanted to see Littlefinger's ultimate demise, he could do nothing and wait. Sooner or later, Littlefinger's ambitions would destroy him. Even if Arya hadn't been the one to kill him, someone else eventually would. But Aegor's goal was different. He wanted to defeat Littlefinger in the arena where he was most comfortable, on the battlefield of manipulation. And that was a much harder challenge. Chaos is a ladder. Chaos is a ladder. If Littlefinger sought to create chaos, then Aegor had to maintain stability. He repeated his imagined opponent's motto silently, preparing to fall asleep. But then a sudden voice emerged from his subconscious. Why must we maintain stability to preserve peace? What if instead we leaned into chaos? What if we escalated the chaos in King's Landing to its absolute limit, just enough to keep it under control? What would happen then? The biggest advantage Aegor had was knowing the truth behind the curtain. To abandon that advantage and try to outwit Littlefinger in his own game of subtle manipulation seemed like the kind of obsessive mistake only a fool would make. If the enemy wanted to muddy the waters, why not stir them further until the waters boiled so furiously that no one, not even Littlefinger, could see clearly? Then let's see how he profits. The boldness of the idea shocked Aegor. For a moment, he even wondered if the thought had been planted in his mind by the Green Seer or some other supernatural force. But after carefully considering the strategy, he realized it was feasible. No matter how fierce the undercurrents of court intrigue became, as long as the chaos didn't escalate into outright war and the markets and livelihoods of the common people remained unaffected, his scheme could continue uninterrupted. Turn the chaos into an uncontrollable storm. Make the game so complex and the situation so volatile that no player of the Game of Thrones could gain an advantage. When the dust settled, the ones who stayed out of it and focused solely on building wealth, like himself and Tyrion, would be the ultimate winners. There were countless ways to sow chaos, but what was the cheapest? Tyrion's enthusiasm for the project was beyond imagination. When Aegor woke from his dreams and got dressed to go out on business, Tyrion had already taken Morris to the outskirts of the city to meet the young man who made paper. Of course, Aegor wasn't ashamed of getting up late. He'd been working until the early hours, and in terms of rest he'd probably had 2 or 3 hours less sleep than the dwarf. While eating breakfast, Aegor ran into Yoren, who also seemed to have woken up late. This fellow crow was thoroughly enjoying life in King's Landing, far from the constraints of the wall and his superiors. Thinking of how hard he had been working himself, Aegor couldn't help but envy Yoren's carefree attitude. "Yoren, I need to ask you something." Aegor, sitting in the inn's common room with his breakfast, suddenly remembered something. "You went to the prison recently to identify a few recruits, didn't you?" "I did. Why do you ask?" Yoren sat down across from his colleague and waved to the serving girl to bring him breakfast as well. "It's not unusual. Only men guilty of crimes that leave no hope of release would choose the Black Cloak. Was there a man named Jaqen Hkar among them?" "There was. How did you know about him?" Yoren, now dressed in the new black clothes Aegor had bought for him, no longer carried that sour smell. "I heard it mentioned somewhere. Do you know how he ended up arrested and thrown into the black cells?" "Of course I know. When we recruit new men we always ask about their backgrounds," Yoren said with a shrug. "The other 2 prisoners he was with are madmen, dangerous killers. Even I wouldn't want to be stuck in a room with them. But Jaqen was different, a strange one. He got himself arrested for stealing books from the royal library." "Stealing books?" Aegor's interest was piqued. This was new information even to him. What sort of book would require Bravos to send one of its most skilled assassins to steal it? With this question in mind, he pressed further. "How would I know? I can't read." Aegor chuckled, having forgotten that detail, but another thought struck him. "Still, stealing books hardly seems like the sort of crime that lands someone in the black cells with murderers, does it? Tusk, do you even know where the royal library is?" Yoren leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It's between the White Sword Tower and the Hands Tower, right in the Red Keep. The official charge wasn't stealing books, it was trespassing in the king's residence with ill intent. That's no small matter." Yoren grinned slyly, clearly enjoying the tale. And the way he got caught was almost comical. Apparently he hid in the Red Keep's kitchens during the day and snuck into the library at night. Who knows how long he stayed there, but no one else had borrowed books that month, and a thin layer of dust settled on the shelves and floor. His footprints and handprints were left behind, and the cleaning steward noticed. They reported it to the Kingsguard, and Barristan Selmy himself decided to investigate with another knight. Sure enough, they found Jaqen inside. The royal library has no windows, so the poor fool had no choice but to surrender. Jaqen Hkar might indeed be one of the most dangerous assassins in the world, but even he couldn't go head-to-head with 2 Kingsguard knights, one of whom was widely recognized as the best swordsman in Westeros. If Jaqen hadn't been caught on purpose, his capture was simply a matter of bad luck. But what exactly was he looking for in the royal library? By this time, Yoren's breakfast had been brought over. The old crow pretended to swat the serving girl's backside, making her scream and run off. Laughing to himself, he tore into a piece of bread and continued. "The most important part is this. How long had the previous hand of the king been dead? Sure, Jon Arryn supposedly died of illness, but isn't it suspicious that someone snuck into a place less than 100 feet from the Hand's Tower? So they sentenced Jaqen to death, burying him alongside the former hand. That is quite a coincidence." "Coincidence?" Yoren snorted, lowering his voice again. "I think this man or one of his companions might have been the one who killed Jon Arryn. He looks calm and mild like some traveling meister, but those 2 lunatics in his cell were terrified of him. Why do you think that is? He's good with a blade. I'd bet he's more than just good," Yoren muttered. "Still, this is all speculation, just us talking. Besides, even if he did kill the Hand, so what? The Night's Watch has taken in worse men before. Jaqen might have killed many people, but in this case Aegor thought he was probably innocent. It was almost funny how even a powerful faceless man could look so pitiful when fate turned against him. You took in those 2 lunatics as well. Of course, as long as they're willing to wear black, we'll take them. That's what the Lord Commander always says. Be careful with men like that. We've had brothers go mad and kill their own before." Aegor frowned. Such tragedies had happened in the Watch's history and he didn't want to see them happen again. Yoren shrugged. "I just recruit them. The more I bring in, the better I've done my job. Training them is the Lord Commander's problem, not mine." Aegor sighed. He understood the necessity, but that didn't mean he agreed with it. "Don't sigh so much," Yoren said with a smirk. "Next time I'm here, I expect you to recruit someone useful for us. Do your best." "I'll try." After breakfast, still puzzled over Jaqen's actions in the library, Aegor went to the Night's Watch office. The storefront was still empty, naturally, with no customers yet. As the chief logistics officer, he was a commander without soldiers, and the disadvantages were becoming increasingly apparent. Whatever needed doing, he had to do it himself. Handling one task was fine, but juggling multiple issues at once left him stretched thin. He found himself wishing for a reliable follower, someone skilled like Bronn or as loyal as Podrick Payne. Ideally, someone who combined both traits, but everything was still in its early stages and he didn't have time to rush such matters. After putting up 2 notices written by Tyrion on the office door, Aegor returned inside, just as his apprentice arrived early for their lesson. A Stark guard Aegor didn't recognize had escorted Arya to the office. The girl's hair was tied in a neat ponytail today and she wore a fitted skirt that was clearly custom-made in Winterfell. It wasn't particularly striking, but it was enough to make Aegor smile knowingly. This girl takes her promises seriously. You wait outside, Arya instructed the guard who had accompanied her. She then turned to her teacher with an eager expression. I did as you said, when do we start? Please take a seat. Aegor didn't answer her question immediately. Instead, he politely addressed the Stark guard. Does Lord Stark know that Miss Arya is here? When the guard confirmed that Eddard Stark was aware, Aegor turned to Arya and said, all right, follow me. Arya clutched a long object wrapped in cloth tightly in her arms and excitedly followed Aegor into the inner room. The office included a small backyard, roughly a few dozen square meters, a rather luxurious setup for the location. Originally, Aegor had planned to use the space to plant flowers and build a latrine, but for now it seemed it could serve other purposes. Aegor walked to a corner, picked up a training sword and turned back toward Arya. As he did, he noticed her unwrapping the slender rapier Jon Snow had given her. That's a nice little sword, he said, eyeing it. Looks like a sewing needle. How do you know it's called needle? Arya's eyes lit up, her excitement growing. She looked at Aegor as if she'd found a kindred spirit. I also know who forged it and who gave it to you, Aegor thought to himself, though he only smiled warmly. Very good, it seems we share the same taste. Now put your needle away. Can't I just practice with this? That's a real sword, Aegor said, shaking his head. Do you want to kill me or get yourself killed? But I brought it here so carefully, Arya protested. If I take it back, my father might find out. Aegor wouldn't confiscate the sword, he had no reason to. He needed to foster trust and build a closer relationship with the girl. You can leave it with me, I'll keep it safe for you, and when you're ready perhaps we can even spar with real swords. Arya hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I guess this way I won't have to worry about the nuns rummaging through my things. Then it's settled, Aegor said, gesturing to the training sword. Now take this one. In terms of swordsmanship, Aegor might not even be half as skilled as the swordmaster hired by Arya's father. But teaching a beginner like Arya who had no prior experience with swordplay wasn't a competition. A higher skill level didn't necessarily mean one would be a better teacher. Aegor still remembered how, back in junior high, his physics classes were taught by a PE teacher. It sounded like a tired old joke, but it was true. His parents had been busy starting a business, and he'd ended up in a small, underfunded school in his hometown. The school didn't lack math teachers, but for every other subject, staffing was improvised. His homeroom teacher, a young woman fresh out of sports school, ended up teaching both physical education and physics. Her physics knowledge was basic at best. She was learning the subject herself while preparing her lessons. Aegor could still recall the amusing incidents that occurred in class, like when she'd realized she'd taught something wrong the day before and corrected herself in the next lesson. But what stood out most was her earnestness. Despite the school's poor conditions and her inexperience, the physics scores of her class were consistently higher than those taught by more qualified teachers in other classes. When it came to teaching, extensive knowledge wasn't always the deciding factor. More important were teaching methods that were engaging, content that was clear and easy to understand, and a genuine willingness to help students learn. A good teacher needed to set a solid foundation, cultivate interest, and inspire confidence. That PE teacher could never have taught high school physics, but her patience, dedication, and care left a lasting impression on Aegor. Now he found himself stepping into a similar role as Arya's swordsmanship teacher. His own skill level might be average, but he believed that as long as he was serious, patient, and attentive, he could do no worse than Sir Alliser Thorne. The most practical reason Aegor had agreed to teach Arya was to build a relationship with a member of the Stark family. If the time came when he needed to benefit from Eddard's position as Hand of the King, having Arya's goodwill might prove invaluable. With that goal in mind, he wasn't as strict or meticulous as Syrio Forel had been in the original story. There were no theatrical flourishes, no throwing swords to see if she could catch them. Instead, he handed Arya a lightweight training sword in a straightforward manner and began by teaching her how to hold it and stand correctly. Arya was left-handed, which he found interesting. He once heard that the left hand reacted faster than the right, a possible advantage for a swordsman. There's no such thing as one perfect sword style, Aegor explained. There are countless techniques for attacking and defending: thrusting, chopping, slashing, sweeping, bumping for offense, dodging, blocking, parrying, and deflecting for defense. A swordsman's job is to master these techniques and know how to combine them in the right situations. He emphasized the basics. We'll start here, build a solid foundation, and later you can decide what techniques and styles suit you best. Aegor began teaching Arya the most fundamental movements. Many swordsmen could demonstrate these techniques more beautifully or skillfully than him, but that didn't mean they'd be better teachers. Aegor's own experience worked to his advantage. Having only started learning swordsmanship a year ago, he still remembered the struggles and questions he'd faced as a beginner, along with the solutions he'd discovered. To Aegor's surprise, Arya picked up the basics quickly. She practiced the movements with enthusiasm and soon asked, "How long do I have to keep doing these moves?" "It's never too long. These are the most basic movements. You've just learned to walk and now you want to run. If you think you're ready, then come and try to attack me," Aegor said. After a round of clumsy exchanges, Arya failed to even touch the corner of his clothes. "My skirt is in the way, can I take it off?" "No, deal with it. You're a girl, a lady of the Stark family. There will be plenty of occasions in the future when you'll have to wear a skirt. Do you think an enemy will politely give you time to change into pants?" "But why do girls have to wear skirts? Pants are so much more convenient and comfortable." "Don't blame the skirt, keep practicing." "No fair, this sword is heavier than Needle. And it's still much lighter than a real sword. Besides, are you planning to fight with Needle for the rest of your life?" As Arya grumbled about her skirt and the training sword, they continued practicing until lunchtime. After eating, Aegor suggested taking a break. There was no need to rush her progress. Training for long hours was one thing, but whether Arya could handle the strain was another. Besides, Aegor was wary of pushing her too hard. If she learned too quickly, he might run out of material to teach her in less than a month. Back in the inner office, they relaxed in their chairs and chatted. As master and apprentice, they had only met a few times before and knew very little about each other. Aegor saw this as a good opportunity to strengthen their bond. He recalled how he'd won Tyrion's attention back in Winterfell by weaving an elaborate tale. Now he planned to do the same with Arya, tailoring his story to suit the playful, headstrong little girl. As expected, Arya was quickly captivated by the lie he had carefully crafted. Aegor avoided delving into advanced concepts or complex systems from Tsina, and instead focused on ideas that the rigid and hierarchical world of Westeros lacked most: gender equality and a freer, more open way of life. He told her that in a distant country west of the Sunset Sea, girls could openly learn swordsmanship, join the army, and even become officials. Perhaps most shocking and enticing for a girl like Arya, women there could choose their own husbands and divorce them if they weren't satisfied. If Aegor had stopped there, Arya might simply have daydreamed about this fictional land. But when he casually mentioned that he had come to Westeros and joined the Night's Watch after an accident during his travels around the world, Arya's eyes lit up with excitement. "You're an adventurer." The girl's blood seemed to boil with enthusiasm, or perhaps her youthful imagination was simply running wild. Either way, Aegor instantly became her new idol. "When are you going home? Take me with you on your next adventure." "God only knows when I'll be able to go back. There isn't a single ship in Westeros capable of safely crossing the Sunset Sea," Aegor replied with a helpless shrug. "Is that so? Well, tell me more adventure stories then. No more sword practice. Later, no rush." Arya's sudden change of focus caught Aegor off guard. It was troublesome to say the least. Making up stories about Tsina wasn't difficult. After all, in a sense, he really was from there. But he wasn't a real adventurer. Of course, even if he'd never experienced such things himself, he'd read enough fantasy and adventure novels to weave convincing tales. Just as Aegor began pulling details from his memory to spin a story, Tyrion's voice called out from outside the door. "Aegor, come out and meet the guests. The first bond buyer is here." Didn't Tyrion go to find the young man who made paper? How is he suddenly here at this moment, successfully brokering a deal for the first time? And hadn't they agreed to wait until the seal arrived before starting this venture? Why begin in advance? A flood of questions clogged Aegor's mind. But generally speaking, fundraising is just another way of doing business. For a merchant, having customers come to you is never a bad thing. Pausing the story he had been telling, Aegor stood up, pushed the door open, left the office, and stepped into the outer room. Against the familiar backdrop of the little devil's short stature, a figure that Aegor recognized loomed tall and imposing, an unexpected and striking sight. "Sir Jaime, little devil!" Aegor's surprised exclamation overlapped with Arya's cheerful, excited cry. The scene was surreal. The Night's Watch office, not even officially open yet, was now crowded with important figures. Tyrion and Jaime, both prominent members of the Lannister family, Arya, the youngest daughter of House Stark, and several guards wearing either Stark or Lannister colors. For a moment, Aegor felt as if he hadn't traveled through time but had instead stumbled onto the set of Game of Thrones. When Arya burst out from the inner room of the Night's Watch office, Tyrion was as taken aback as Aegor was upon recognizing Jaime. While Tyrion didn't like being called nicknames, he wasn't one to hold grudges against children. He greeted her warmly and without pretense. "Good afternoon, Arya. What brings you here?" "I'm learning swordsmanship from my master," Arya replied proudly. "You learning swordsmanship?" The 10-year-old girl was nearly the same height as Tyrion, and the two struck up an easy conversation. Meanwhile, Jaime and Aegor began talking nearby. "What do you want?" Jaime asked, his irritation thinly veiled. Whenever he recalled the debacle at Winterfell, a sense of unreality washed over him. He and Cersei had always been careful, so careful that not even Robert had discovered their secret for years. Yet on that day he didn't know what madness had overtaken him. He had been bold enough to carry on their tryst even after being seen. As if that weren't enough, he had then frightened a Stark child into near death. Why is a Night's Watchman who knows too much here in King's Landing instead of staying at the Wall where he belongs? Hearing the subtext in Jaime's words, Aegor instinctively knew this wasn't good. He had hoped to avoid prominent figures and quietly make a fortune. But Tyrion had dragged his brother into the matter, and although it was Aegor who had suggested starting with familiar people, this was far too familiar. He couldn't show weakness now, nor could he let Jaime think he was here to blackmail him. After some quick thinking, Aegor deflected with a calm response. I am here on orders from the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch to gather food and armaments to resist the wildlings. I'm not here to trouble you, I'm here for business. HMPH, Jaime scoffed, his suspicion evident. Out of all the people in the Night's Watch, they picked you. What a coincidence. Come on, who would believe that? Indeed, I am deeply grateful for the Commander's trust. For the time being, I'm in charge of the Night's Watch's logistics. This is the truth, believe it or not, that's up to you. Fine, since Tyrion is your friend, hand me one of those bonds you're selling. I'm unlucky enough as it is, can I just pay you off and be done with this mess? Of course, please follow me to the inner room, Sir Jaime. I'll explain the details of the Night's Watch bonds, including the trading rules and expected returns. If you don't believe me, I don't care. But I don't mind taking your money. While Tyrion distracted himself with Arya, who was a little too fascinated by dwarves, he didn't miss the exchange between Aegor and his brother. On the surface it seemed normal, but something about it felt off. All right, Arya, there'll be plenty of opportunities for us to run into each other again in the future, Tyrion said, steering the conversation. Can we get back to business with your master now? Okay, Arya replied, though curiosity still lingered on her face. But what are Night's Watch bonds? Come in and you'll understand after listening, Aegor said, rubbing his temples in mild frustration. He gestured for the group to enter the office, moving stools and chairs for everyone to sit, including Arya. No need for explanations, Jaime interrupted brusquely. Just tell me how much they cost. 100 gold dragons apiece, right? How many do you want me to buy? Don't bother with theatrics, just name your price so we can move on. Aegor hesitated. Whether he was overthinking or imagining things, he felt an unspoken understanding between himself and Jaime. They seemed to know what the other was truly thinking beneath their words. Just as Aegor was deciding how to respond, Tyrion cut in with a puzzled frown. What's with you, Jaime? Didn't you tell me earlier today that you had nothing to do? Why are you suddenly in such a rush now that we're here? Nothing, Jaime replied curtly, crossing his arms and sighing. I just feel uneasy whenever I see someone wearing black. I didn't know you had this problem. Tyrion rolled his eyes. Neither did I until now. Jaime shot a pointed glance at Aegor, then turned to Arya. Shouldn't your apprentice go play outside for a while? What? Arya protested, her lips forming a pout. Why are you being so secretive? It's fine, let her stay, Aegor interjected, shaking his head. In truth, he wasn't keen on letting Arya know too much about the Night's Watch bonds. But at this stage, it wasn't a major secret. Building rapport was more important. If he kicked her out now, she'd undoubtedly grow suspicious. And if she ran off to tell Eddard that he'd held a secret meeting with 2 Lannisters behind closed doors, that would spell trouble. Then, without further ado, I'll explain the details of the Night's Watch bonds to Sir Jaime. After several rounds of discussion and revisions over the past few days, a finalized version of the detailed bond rules had been drafted. While the original content remained mostly intact, a few supplementary clauses were added, and at the very bottom he included a rather dubious and ultimately unenforceable clause familiar from the world they lived in before. The final interpretation of this bond rests with the Night's Watch. In front of Jaime and Arya, Aegor read out the rules one by one, explaining them clearly and methodically. At first, Arya listened attentively, her curiosity evident. However, it didn't take long before she started yawning, her interest fading quickly. On the other hand, Jaime, who looked impatient at first, gradually became more serious as he listened. If you said you didn't bring money with you when you came to King's Landing and needed to borrow some temporarily, I'd understand that, Jaime said, his sharp gaze fixed on Aegor. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like you're asking to borrow money for the long term. Why not have your commander send someone down with the funds? Even if it's by horseback, it wouldn't take more than a month to travel from the Wall to King's Landing. The pointed question struck directly at the heart of the issue, catching Aegor off guard. He had assumed Jaime to be simple-minded and impulsive before his hand was crippled. Yet it seemed his mind was sharper than expected. Since Sir Jaime is one of us, I won't hide the truth from you, Aegor said, keeping his tone measured. The Night's Watch is facing a dire threat and urgently needs supplies. The long summer is coming to an end, and the Northern Lords have already begun preparing for winter. Right now, they can't provide the Wall with full support. We have no choice but to do what we can to hold on and deal with the rest later. You can't repay the money in the short term, so you're relying on interest to attract creditors, expecting them to take their returns over time. I understand that, Jaime said, leaning back slightly. But when the Crown borrows, the loans are backed by the Royal Treasury. What guarantees do the Night's Watch have? Though Jaime was Tyrion's brother, they were not the same person. The core secret behind the bond scheme couldn't be disclosed to him. Aegor knew the conversation had reached its limit. Tyrion stepped in to clarify the situation further. The bond is secured by the land and all assets of the Night's Watch, he explained, his tone confident. And by guarantees from the hand of the king and myself. That's the public version anyway. In truth, Aegor and I plan to make some money here in King's Landing to resolve the rest of the problem. Make some money, you. Jaime raised an eyebrow, his skepticism clear. I've never known you to be much of a businessman. HMPH, Tyrion snorted. You'll be surprised when the time comes, just tell me, do you support me or not? James chuckled softly, his smile one of reluctant amusement. At last he seemed convinced that Aegor wasn't in King's Landing to blackmail him. Of course I support you, he said. You're my brother after all. I'll buy 200 bonds as a gesture of goodwill. Whether you succeed or fail, don't worry about repaying me. Consider it my donation to the Night's Watch, but don't keep coming back to me for more. After speaking, James turned his attention back to Aegor, his gaze pointed and clear. His expression seemed to say, think of this as hush money, don't push your luck. Aegor shrugged helplessly. There was nothing he could do about it. Trying to explain further would only make things worse. Well then, let's get started on filling out the bonds, James said, leaning forward slightly. Jack took the seal with him and hasn't returned yet. What should we do? Aegor asked. No need to go through all that trouble, Tyrion interjected with a dismissive wave of his hand. Just use your fingerprints. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a blank bond he had prepared in advance, dipped a quill into ink, and began to write.
Author's note. In this chapter, magic and strategy collide, showing that even in a world of White Walkers and dragons, clever minds can change the game. This chapter may end, but the story never stops. More legends, more worlds await your imagination on FanFic Nation. Subscribe and return where every choice shapes destiny.